This is a true story, as real as anything that's ever happened to me. I'm 60 years old now. I've lived a full life, raised a family, and I'm a grandma now. But this memory is still sharp. It's one of those moments that doesn't fade, no matter how much time passes. Back in 1986, I was headed home from a summer working in Yellowstone National Park. I made a quick stop in Topeka, Kansas to visit a friend of mine who had recently moved there with his parents after graduating high school. What was supposed to be a short visit turned into a week, and his family invited me to stay one extra day to join them for a big family reunion out in the country. We took his beat-up car, the kind that had seen better days and had a broken gas gauge. We spent the whole day out in the middle of nowhere with his extended family, eating, talking, just soaking up the sun. As the sun started to dip, we hit the road back toward Topeka, assuming that we had enough gas to make it. Big surprise here, we didn't. The car sputtered and died on the side of a desolate road. My friend figured we were about 6, maybe 7 miles from the nearest gas station. No cell phones back then, so we were standing there trying to figure out what to do next, when a white work van with no windows pulled up beside us. It looked rough, the kind of vehicle you don't really want to think too hard about. A man leaned from the passenger side and asked if we needed help. At that age, you assume people are just being kind. Once you're older, you start to realize how lucky you were that things didn't go differently. We told the man that we'd run out of gas. They offered to give us a lift to the station, and without really thinking it through, we agreed. Once we get in the van, we discover there are a total of 3 men in the vehicle. There are no seats in the back. We're just sitting on the floor of what appears to be a beat-up older model van when we clearly hear the men discussing doing us harm. The driver says he knows a good place to go. The man in the passenger seat, eyeing me, agrees and says that he's all in. My mind is only beginning to catch up to what's going on when the man sitting nearest to us says he's not in and he doesn't want to be involved in this at all. He says he's got a baby now, and he's not cool with whatever's about to happen, that he doesn't want any part of it. The driver and man in the passenger seat said something under their breaths that I couldn't hear, and it felt like there was an angry silence while the driver thought this over. In my mind, I prayed one word: help. My mind felt like I was stuttering thoughts. Part of me was in denial, another part, shock. The fear hadn't even set in yet. Just like a jolt to the system of an unreal horror happening to someone else, because less than an hour ago, I was completely safe without a care in the world. And now the absurd idea of someone taking my life or doing something equally as horrible to me before leaving us somewhere nobody would find us is all I can think of. I couldn't stop those ideas from flipping through my mind. Have you ever been to Kansas? Lots of lonely, God-forsaken, desolate roads to nowhere. If at this point the third guy changed his mind or simply said, just let him out first, I don't think I'd be sharing this with you right now. That's when the men stopped talking to each other. They had never spoken to us at all from the moment we got in the van. My friend and I didn't speak to each other either. We barely looked at each other. We were terrified. I could hear the clanging, rattled trap van's noises and the tires on the road. I saw my friend flexing, as if to warn that he would fight to defend himself, while they were discussing where they would take us. Everything about it felt surreal, but the guy in the back, he said no. And just like that, the driver pulled over, and the guy in the back opened up the side door to let us out. This was all over. Once we got out of the van, the air smelled somehow fragile and tainted. The ground looked different, like I couldn't quite trust it. My friend looked as shaken as I felt. We'd survived a close encounter with shark-like predators, the blackest, darkest of evils. I looked at the gas station in the late afternoon, waning sunset just before dark. That gas station had transformed itself into a beacon of shining light, a safe haven of shelter and safety. And I knew once we got into that gas station, there was no way I'd be walking back to my friend's car. The white van with no windows pulling away from us felt equally as surreal. Like looking at it might give it the power to suck us up in its vacuum of ill intent. Today, when I close my eyes, I can still see that van pulling off. A sort of mirage from a nightmare that crossed over into my waking reality. Hey guys, if you're into the content that we create, we've got a Patreon where you can support the show and get early access to new episodes before everyone else. Just head on over to patreon.com/Malevolent Mischief or check the link in the description and join our community today. Back in 1998 or 99, I was around 5 or 6 years old and living in a crime and drug-ridden part of our downtown area. Our house had a massive backyard, completely overgrown with jungle-like trees and thick bushes. Nature had taken it over, along with the occasional passerby. We knew that because we'd find needles scattered around and half a mattress that had once been on the forest floor, now somehow 15 feet up in the trees. There was also a path back there that people used as a shortcut to the main road, so we had a lot of sketchy foot traffic coming through. When you're a kid, that kind of backyard feels like a nightmare. I was creeped out by it from the day we moved in. I constantly complained to my mom about someone watching me from outside my window at night. There were a couple of times when whoever it was actually shined a flashlight into my room, and I even caught a glimpse of his face. I still remember it. Those dark eyes burned right through me. At first, I didn't mention that to anyone, but eventually I told my mom, although she just brushed it off as nightmares. She ignored my complaints for a week or two, even though I wouldn't let them go. One night, after struggling to get me to sleep, my mom decided to prove that there was nothing out there. The next morning, she dragged me outside to show me that everything was fine, except it wasn't. Right outside my window, the grass had been completely stomped down to dirt. The area was muddy, the grass practically dead, and there were scratch marks on the window frame, like someone had been trying to pry it open with a tool. It wasn't the kind of window that opened easily, though. It was one of those small basement windows. That may have been what kept me safe, although it still shook my family. My mom was horrified and wanted to move immediately. But we were broke, so leaving wasn't something we could do right away. Around the same time, I'd become inseparable from my best friend, who happened to live next door. We were always together. We didn't have much sense of danger back then, and did a lot of dumb stuff, like going door to door, asking neighbors for candy. One favorite stop was this sweet elderly lady who always had hostess cakes. We'd even go inside her house sometimes to hang out. She was unbelievably kind and looked out for us in her own way. Our parents had no clue, though. That was our little secret. One day, my mom called me home so we could go pick up dinner, just around the corner. I was only gone for maybe 15 minutes, but when we came back, our entire block had changed. The street itself was blocked off by police tape. There were 2 or 3 news vans, a dozen police cars, and either a life flight helicopter or a news chopper circling overhead. While we were gone, a man who wasn't from our neighborhood, but had been staying with his mom for a few weeks, walked past my best friend's yard and saw her on the porch. She was just talking to a friend on the phone, making faces and goofing around like kids do. But for some reason, he thought she was talking about him and making fun of him. He got so angry at the idea of being mocked that he walked back to his mom's house, grabbed a butcher knife, and returned with the intention of hurting her for disrespecting him. Thankfully, because of where she was sitting on the porch, she saw him coming and ran inside. She locked herself in the bathroom and called the police. After all, she still had the phone in her hand. But her mom, who was in the kitchen, wasn't as lucky. The man got inside and attacked her. He stabbed and sliced her multiple times. I originally thought that it numbered in the 20s, but after looking up a 1998 article from the local newspaper, I learned that it was 7. Miraculously, her mother survived. After several surgeries and a long recovery, she pulled through. The story made the news, and my mom and I followed every update, hoping for reassurance that my friend's mom was okay. I remember the day they showed the attacker's mugshot on TV, and I felt the most overwhelming, skin-crawling fear I'd ever known. That was the guy who was outside my window. The man who had stabbed my friend's mom was the same who would watch me at night. Later, I learned that we had unknowingly met him weeks before, at that old lady's house. He was her son. He had recently been released from prison and was living with her. We'd met him while visiting for candy, and from that moment on, he had apparently been watching us. I don't remember him from that first meeting, but maybe if I had, maybe if I'd have realized who he was, things could have turned out differently. Maybe I could have told someone. Maybe none of this would have happened. We never ended up moving. My mom figured that since he was in jail, the danger was gone, so we stayed for several more years. But to this day, I can't sleep in any room that has open blinds in them. To the man who used to watch me sleep, who tried to take a mother away from her child, I hope I never see you again, and I also hope you're rotting in prison. All of this just unfolded, so I'm still wrapping my head around it. I've always been a fan of crime documentaries and real-life mystery shows, the kind that make you think twice when something feels off. I truly believe that paying attention to those kinds of stories helped me stay alert today, because if I hadn't been, well, I don't even want to imagine how differently things could have gone. Let me back it up a bit. Right now, my wife and I don't live together. Things have been strained. She's become more unpredictable lately, especially around our daughter, and I've been the one taking care of her. Our little girl is almost 18 months old and is the absolute center of my world. I'm currently between jobs, but my mom's been helping us out a lot. It hasn't been easy, but we're getting by. At around 4 p.m. today, I took my daughter to the store like I usually do after her nap. She's a very active kid, squirmy, chatty, and always curious. So keeping her entertained while shopping is a bit of an adventure in itself. Normally, we just go in for juice, but we were out of some essentials at home. Flour, sugar, noodles. I also remembered we needed milk, so I added that to the list. With everything I was carrying, I couldn't hold her hand like I normally do, so I walked just behind her, encouraging her to stay close. Of course, she'd stop to look at colorful packaging or poke at things on lower shelves every few steps, and I had to keep nudging her along, trying my best not to sound too frustrated. In hindsight, I know I really should have just grabbed a basket. When we finally got to the front, Register 1 was open. It's connected to the customer service desk near the store entrance. As we waited, I kept her busy playing patty cake and itsy bitsy spider, anything to keep her from wandering off. She kept waving at strangers walking by, squealing, "Hi," like she always does. Most people smiled and waved back. Some even stopped to say how cute she was. I'm used to it. She's a little sunshine magnet. The cashier was still helping someone with a return, so I told my daughter to hold my hand while I got ready to pay. I let go for just a second to pull out my debit card, glancing over at her every few seconds to make sure she hadn't wandered off. Everything seemed normal. That is, until the cashier, who was still helping someone else, yelled out, "What are you doing with his daughter?" I spun around just in time to see a man lifting my daughter into his arms and running toward the entrance. The doors didn't open, thankfully. They're one-way doors that only work coming in. The cashier grabbed the phone and started calling the police while I stood frozen for a split second, trying to process what was happening right in front of my face. That's when I came to my senses, and I bolted. I usually carry a pocket knife for practical stuff, breaking seals on juice bottles and whatnot. I was inclined to take it out, but I left it in my pocket. I didn't want to risk making things worse. I sprinted after the guy as someone happened to come in through the outer doors. Right then, before he could slip past, I slammed my fist square into the side of his head. He stumbled hard, and I yanked my daughter right out of his arms. She was crying, but otherwise okay. The man took off running empty-handed, disappearing into the parking lot. Police were at the store within 5 minutes. I told them everything I could remember, but I hadn't seen the guy's face well. He had long shaggy hair, a beard, and was wearing a hoodie. They canvassed the area, taking witness statements and trying to track him down. Someone said they saw him running behind the building, but no one found him that day. After taking our statements, 2 of the officers offered to drive us home. Once we got there, they asked more questions. Had I ever seen this man before? Did anyone come to mind? And what the home situation was like. I told them everything, including that CPS had already been by earlier that day to check in on my wife's mental health plan. The officers listened, gave me their cards, and promised to follow up. About 20 minutes after they left, I got a knock on the door. It was those officers again, only this time they were carrying the biggest box of diapers I've ever seen, along with wipes and about 6 huge grocery bags packed full of food. They even brought some toys, along with a card. I opened it after they left. It said I was a strong father and that my daughter was lucky to have me. Inside was a $100 bill and a little note. Get yourself a drink, or use it however you need. I don't drink, but I'll use it to buy my daughter and my mom a few nice gifts. After everything we've been through, I think they deserve it. To the man who tried to take my daughter, I pray that you're caught and that our paths never cross again. I'll try and keep this story short, but so much of what makes it creepy is in the details surrounding the experience. My mother and myself decided to visit Nevada City, California on a whim. It's an old-timey Victorian-era mining logging town built in 1856. Look at pictures on Google if you really want to see a creepy town. It looks haunted without even having to try. After eating lunch at a brew pub, we decided to stroll around the massive Pioneer Historical Cemetery on the outskirts of town. It wasn't quite dusk yet, but the trees are really tall in this area, so daylight is hard to gauge, and it usually feels later than it is. The cemetery itself was sprawling. I mean, most pioneer cemeteries are, because of the high mortality rate of the time. Lots and lots of child graves. As we progress through the cemetery, it starts like a proper one, with large, ornate tombs and mausoleums, marble obelisks, family plots. But what's wild about this cemetery is that it stretches on almost forever into the woods. Spooky, but this isn't a paranormal story. As we followed the cemetery deeper and deeper into the woods, it becomes hard to tell what's a grave or not, and it's getting more wild and overgrown. It eventually devolved into just wilderness, with the occasional sign of homeless camps like abandoned tents, bags of trash, things of the sort. Luckily, the trees were opening up, and more daylight was coming through, and we ended up in an open area with a large, solitary juniper tree, tall brush, along with a few random graves. I sort of tripped over something, and it turned out to be a purse, like a designer purse, and it looked old as hell, like it had been there for a while. Looking up from the purse about 10 yards ahead of me, I saw what looked like a pile of women's clothing. But then I noticed a tangled mass of hair, and it froze me. Have you ever known something without actually knowing something? I knew that this was a dead woman's body, down to my core. I put a hand out and stopped my mom, who was trailing behind me. Get your phone and call the police. That's a body over there. She immediately started dialing 911 because, like me, I think she just knew. Then it gets bananas. As my mom and I are discussing the situation, we had our attention turned away from the corpse. When we looked back at the body, I swear to God, she was sitting up with her back turned to us. She was wearing a bright red trench coat, and she had super grimy blonde hair that was more standing up than laying on her shoulders. It's like the grime in her hair allowed it to defy gravity. Slowly, she turned her head over her shoulder like something out of a horror movie, and that's when she spotted us. This woman, obviously not a corpse, literally jumped to her feet lightning fast and completed the turn to face us. Her front was a mess of torn clothing, and she was barely covered. In the weirdest gait I've ever seen, she rapidly came towards us in this jerking, lurching fashion. Her hands were desperately trying to keep herself covered. My first thought was, now maybe she had been assaulted. She tried to speak, but it was like she couldn't form words, only make short, high-pitched squeaks. As she closed the distance between us, she stopped and pointed down in excitement at the purse that I had tripped over. I asked if it was hers, and when I did, her expression changed into this horrible smirk. It's something that still haunts me. And suddenly, she was slowly starting to undress herself, and we had to shout at her to get her to stop. By this point, we had the cops on the way. We said we had found someone in serious distress. Be that as it may, we both knew this was not a safe situation for us, and we quickly backed away the way that we had come. We eventually turned and cooked it out of there. When we followed up with the police out of concern and morbid curiosity, they said that whoever we found must have fled the scene because they didn't find any signs of her. I hope to God she's okay and got the help that she needed. I should start by saying that this is an extremely complicated and personal situation. I'll do my absolute best to try to tell it. Names and any identifying information won't be included here. I've struggled with mental health issues from a young age, and by the time I was 15, things had become unmanageable for my parents. They decided to send me to a lockdown school after my freshman year of high school. I literally woke up one morning to two strangers standing in my house, telling me I was going to a boarding school. They said if I refused, they would cuff me, so I went. After a wilderness program, I was placed into an RTC, or residential treatment facility. The school I was sent to was connected to several abusive lockdown schools in the US, many of which, thankfully, have since been shut down. The school was extremely abusive. Isolation, forced medication, physical restraint, stress positions, attack therapy, withholding exercise and food. All of this was common. The full story of what happened there isn't really the point of what I'm sharing here, but what matters is that the school took me, an already struggling kid, and made everything much worse. If I was troubled before, I was completely broken within days. I became a shell of a person and stayed dissociated most of the time because it was the only way I could cope. A couple of weeks after I arrived, a boy named James joined our unit. That's what they called our dorm group. This is where the story I'm trying to share really begins. At first, I hated James. He rubbed me the wrong way, and I went out of my way to be a jerk to him. But we ended up sharing a room, and over time, things changed. I started to become attached to him. We began spending a lot of time alone, bonding. I didn't realize it then, but I slowly started to fall in love with the guy. At the time, I identified as straight, so I thought of it as kind of a brotherly love. Though looking back, there were definitely signs that it was something deeper. As things at the school kept getting worse, James and I leaned on each other to survive the abuse. We were all the other had. We went through some terrible experiences together, and that trauma created a strong bond between us. I felt like I couldn't exist without him. He felt the same way. And we promised each other we'd stay together and continue our friendship after leaving. Thankfully, James lived only about an hour from my parents' house. Eventually, James was discharged. I was supposed to stay behind, but after a lot of begging and pleading, my parents let me leave as well. I called James the moment I got home to tell him. We started seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week, and for a while, it was one of the happiest times of my life. He was my world. He was the only one who really understood what I'd been through. But after a while, his parents started noticing how physically affectionate James was with me, and how emotionally attached I was to him. I'll never know exactly what led to what happened next. I'm only left to guess. One day, I got an email from James. He said he thought we should spend less time together. At the bottom, he added a little jab. We used to say we loved each other with 99% of our souls, because he said he couldn't give 100% since he didn't love himself fully. But in the email, he wrote, P.S. It's 72% now. I completely lost it. I grabbed the nearest sharp objects and slashed at my wrists, screaming and crying, begging for this not to be real. How could this happen? No one would ever understand me like he did, and I couldn't breathe without him. We saw each other a few more times after that, but everything was different. He was distant now. And the last time we met, he told me he wanted to cut off contact completely. That's when it all started. First, I called him constantly. I knew both his house phone and his cell phone numbers, and I would call all day, sometimes not saying anything, other times crying and begging for him to talk to me or love me again. I even started calling his parents, pleading with them. Then things escalated. I started calling his mom's cell phone, her work phone. I managed to get his father's work number and cell phone too. I called all of them, sometimes begging, sometimes just sitting silently on the line. I even manipulated a mutual friend into calling while I listened in, feeding her questions to ask. Eventually, they had to change every number in the house. Before James cut contact, we used to attend a church group together. I still knew where it was, and I knew that he still went. My girlfriend at the time, who was much older than me, would drive me there to try to see him. The first couple of times, he wasn't there, but I kept coming back, asking around for information. The third time, that's when he showed up. I approached him and asked if he really didn't love me at all anymore. He looked me right in the eye and said no. That was it. No. I broke down crying, begging him, making a scene until the staff asked me to leave. I'm sure it was humiliating for him, especially since he identified as straight as well. After that, I started having my girlfriend drive me to his house at night. I would sit in the car, staring up at his bedroom window. I did this at least twice. Sometimes, I'd even have her knock on the door asking if James was home. Time went on, and somehow I managed to convince James to add me as a MySpace friend. It gave me hope that maybe we could fix things, though deep down I think I knew better. I saw that he had a girlfriend now. I reached out to her, pretending it was harmless, and I convinced her to meet me. She was a nice girl, albeit a bit too trusting, and that was something that I keyed in on. I got her to trust me and open up a bit. She told me everything. She told me James's new house phone number, his new cell, his MySpace password, even details about their sex life and families. I hacked into his MySpace and shut it down. Then I started calling his house again, calling his cell, screaming at his mom, gloating to him about how I had used his girlfriend. Once again, they had to change all of their numbers. Finally, after one last phone call between me and James, something inside of me broke. I was done. I knew I couldn't keep doing this, and I stopped everything. I feel terrible for everything I put him and his family through, and I wish that there was a way to apologize today. I'm sharing all this to give you a glimpse into the other side of stalking, what goes on in the mind of someone who does it. I was really sick, although that's not an excuse for my behavior. I'm lucky I wasn't arrested. There's a lot more to the story of what we went through together, but I hope this helps someone understand why people sometimes engage in this kind of behavior. Today, I'm a much different person. I still struggle with my mental health, but I haven't acted out like this ever since. I've worked hard to build a stable life, and it's taken years to get here. Hopefully, sharing this can help others better understand stalking, as well as the mental illness behind it. Several years ago, when my son, who's now 18 years old, was still a baby, I found myself longing for friendships. I became a mother in my early 20s and was the first in my friend group to do so, which somewhat alienated me from the rest of my friends. Not in an intentional way, just in the way that we didn't have as much in common at that point in time and our life priorities differed a lot. They would visit on the seldom occasion and gush over my son, but outside of that, our lives were just very different. During this time, a girl who was local to me found me on social media and invited me to this parenting forum that she belonged to that had some like-minded moms. It was really great for a while. I would get on there every day and talk to other moms. We would share recipes and tips on parenting. We did gift exchanges, and due to the nature of the forum, catering mostly to alternative-style parenting, we shared a lot of the same musical taste, shared posts of new tattoos, as well as similar senses of humor. We even split ourselves into local groups to do meetups and playdates, threw Halloween parties, met up at bars, without the kids. It was actually a blast at the time. Well, around then, a girl started posting on there a lot. She wasn't local to me, but she posted in lots of threads and quickly became well known in our forum. She said that she was pretty newly pregnant, if I remember correctly, and after a while she announced that she was pregnant with triplets. She seemed so incredulous and amazed by it, and we were all amazed too. She wasn't doing any fertility treatment, so it was a shocker, but we were all very happy for her. She had one of those personalities that was pretty big and made a lot of friends on there. People started sending her tons of things for the baby, as well as sending her money to help with the sudden increase in her family size. She posted pictures of her very large belly, and we all waited anxiously for her to give birth so we could see the new babies. Finally, the day came and she gave birth. I can't remember all of the details of the story she finally posted, but she said that she went into labor early and arrived at her local hospital, but due to the dangers of laboring triplets, she had to be transferred to a larger city hospital. She said that one of the triplets had died, one had gone home with her, and the other was in intensive care. A couple days later, she posted that the triplet who was in the NICU had also passed away. We were totally floored and upset for her. People sent her more money and more gifts, along with sympathy cards. Then the pictures started. First, she posted a pic of her surviving baby, an adorable little chubby baby girl with a shock of red hair. Then she started posting post-mortem pictures of the babies who had died. I'm a registered nurse, and although I don't work in a NICU environment, I know what sickly, premature newborns look like. I think most people do, even without experience in healthcare. These babies looked identical to the surviving baby, just as healthy and chubby and full term. Only difference was, they had beanies on covering their hair, which she had described to us as being differently colored than the little girl who lived. It really just looked like her surviving baby sleeping. I remember that one of the girls on our forum, as a sweet gesture, photoshopped the picture of one of the deceased babies, making it look as if she had angel wings. That would have been right around the point where she posted a picture of herself right after giving birth holding a baby, while still in her hospital bed. Funny thing was that a nurse happened to be in the picture as well, and her name tag clearly had the name of the local hospital, not the city hospital that she claimed to have ended up in. Did this nurse decide to travel with her to a hospital that she didn't work at? I don't think so. Not only that, but since we were all very concerned about her, many of the forum members attempted to send flowers to the funeral home that she claimed the funeral was at. That funeral home had no idea who they were trying to send flowers to, and no other funeral home in the area was holding a funeral for her babies. It just didn't make any sense. The moderators of the group put two and two together, did some research of their own, and figured out that she was completely full of crap. She was pregnant with one baby, lied about due dates, and then lied to say that two of the babies had died in order to gain attention and gifts. Some of the moms who were local to her even went to visit after it happened and said that when they brought up the other babies, her husband just ignored it and wouldn't say a thing about it, as if he was just used to her being a pathological liar. Her huge belly picture turned out to be a manipulated angle of a naturally large pregnant belly of a singleton. I myself had a larger pregnant belly when carrying my son than my friend who had twins. The saddest part was that while this circus was going on, two of the moms on there actually did lose their babies, and while it didn't go unnoticed, it was sort of in the background compared to the triplet drama because those moms were not attention whores and were quietly mourning their own losses. One was local to me, and I attended the funeral, which was the saddest funeral I've ever been to. I'm glad that although I fell for the triplet drama, I never sent any money or gifts to this crazy woman. The group kind of fell apart after that. It continued to exist, but a lot of the members felt like their trust had been taken advantage of. Many of us felt guilty for paying attention to that squeaky wheel, while other moms were mourning real losses. And the overall feel of the forum just changed, even with the crazy lady being banned. It does make me concerned for her real child, though. If someone is willing to take pictures of their baby sleeping and post it online pretending that they're dead, what other things might she be willing to do for attention? Back in 2015, I was working as a live-in home health aide for a wealthy family. It was just me and my patient living together in a really nice condo tucked away in a quiet neighborhood on a golf course. We were easily the youngest people in the entire community. I was 27 at the time, and my patient, we'll call him Jake, was only 21. Jake had been diagnosed with a form of autism that needed special support. He also had sensory processing disorder, as well as borderline personality disorder, along with a history of substance abuse. On top of that, he'd recently gotten into some legal trouble and had been declared incompetent by the courts. Jake was a nice kid at his core, but emotionally unstable with almost no social awareness. He refused to consistently take his prescribed medication, which actually worked really well when he did. That, combined with his drug use, made him a pretty easy target for people who wanted to take advantage of him, and plenty of people did. Right before I moved in, 6 so-called friends of his came over to hang out and ended up staying for 2 straight weeks, draining Jake's bank account to fund their little binge of meth, coke, MDMA, and weed. They completely trashed the condo. Jake, who mentally seemed more like a young teenager than a grown man, didn't know how to tell them no. He just wanted people to like him. Drugs, in a twisted way, became his way to fit in and cope with his depression and anxiety. By the time I came aboard, things were finally calming down. It was a pretty sweet gig, if I'm being honest. I was paid well, had a nice place to live rent-free, and my main responsibilities were simple: keep the condo clean, make sure food was stocked, and help Jake stay on his meds. When I first moved in, Jake's mom, who was technically my boss, sat me down and gave me a heads up about one person in particular, a woman named Amber. She lived off and on downstairs with her father and occasionally stayed there to visit her 2 children who her father had full custody of. Amber was 37 years old, tall, thin, blonde, and honestly looked about 10 years younger than she was. If you passed her on the street, you might assume she was in her mid-20s. Jake's mom warned me that Amber was bad news. She was an addict, unemployed, no car, and always looking for someone to manipulate. She had a history with Jake too. Not long before I got there, Amber had asked Jake to borrow his car for an hour. She disappeared with it for 2 weeks. She was also the one who first introduced Jake to the group of people who trashed the condo. After that car theft incident, Jake's mom installed a GPS tracker on his vehicle that could even disable the engine remotely if needed. She told me she didn't expect me to play security guard, but if Amber showed up, or Jake went anywhere with her, I was to call her immediately. In the weeks that followed, I had a few minor encounters with Amber. She would randomly show up and try to talk her way into the condo or convince Jake to drive her places. Each time, I had to politely but firmly shut her down. No, you can't come inside. No, Jake won't be driving you anywhere. No, he can't go to that party. She never got aggressive, but she definitely didn't like me. She'd say things like, "Jake's an adult, you know. He doesn't need a babysitter." She was always trying to whisper to Jake when we saw her around the neighborhood, no doubt trying to manipulate him for rides or money. Amber always seemed a little bit off to me. Her speech was slow and spacey, and her eyes were wide, like she was constantly zoned out. She told me she'd recently been hit by a car while riding her bike, but later I found out she'd just been high on Xanax the whole time. That probably explained why she seemed so out of it anytime I saw her. Then came one night. Jake was out of town visiting his father, giving me a bit of a mini vacation. My best friend was over, and we were just hanging out, drinking PBRs, watching RuPaul's Drag Race, having a low-key night. Around 11 p.m., we heard a light knock at the door. I checked the peephole. It was Amber. I ignored it. But about 30 seconds later, she knocked again, this time a little louder. Still though, I didn't answer. She left for a few minutes, but eventually came back. This time, she was pounding on the door like a cop. I was getting irritated. I was off work, didn't want to deal with her, and definitely didn't want her causing a scene with my friend here. After a bit, she tried a softer approach, knocking and calling out, "Hello? Jake? I need help. Hello?" I stayed quiet. That's when I heard the door handle jiggle. She tried opening the door, but of course it was locked. I always kept it locked. That seemed to set her off. She started pounding on the door harder, screaming like something had snapped. I got up and checked the peephole again. What I saw is something that I'll never forget. Her eyes were huge, pupils blown wide, hair tangled and wild, sweat dripping all down her face. She looked completely crazed. I asked through the door what she wanted. She said she needed to talk to Jake, that he owed her money, and that she needed a ride to her boyfriend's house immediately. I told her Jake wasn't home and that I couldn't help her. She asked if I could drive her instead. I told her I'd been drinking and was heading off to bed soon, so she needed to get out from in front of the door. That's when she let out this frustrated, almost primal scream, punched the door before storming off. After a while, my friend and I went to bed, figuring that was the end of it. Well, the next morning as we're getting ready to go out for breakfast, I heard another knock. This one was the loud, distinct knock of law enforcement. I checked the peephole again, and like I was expecting, no Amber. This time it was a cop. When I opened the door, that's when I saw police everywhere. Squad cars, a crime scene unit van, as well as an ambulance. My first thought was that Amber must have overdosed or something. But when the officer asked if I'd heard anything strange the night before, I told him about Amber's visit and asked if she was okay. That's when he told me Amber was in custody for the murder of her father. He asked if Jake owned a crossbow and if it might be missing. The answer to both of those questions was yes. It had been missing for weeks. At the station, detectives eventually filled me in. Apparently, that night, Amber got into an argument with her father. When he refused to give her a ride, likely because she was desperate to get to her boyfriend for more drugs, things escalated. She used the stolen crossbow and stabbed her father repeatedly. Reports later revealed that she had stabbed him over 70 times, both with the crossbow as well as other various items. After killing him, she stole his truck but didn't make it far. Police had pulled her over on suspicion of drunk driving less than a mile from the condo. When they approached her, she told them she was speeding because she thought something might have happened to her father but wouldn't explain why. That's what caused the police to do a welfare check on him. Amber led police on a high-speed chase across 2 counties before eventually crashing. She was arrested and later indicted for first-degree premeditated murder. So, yeah, that was the night my drug-addicted neighbor tried to drag me into her chaos, either just before or right after she had murdered her father with my patient's crossbow. Safe to say, I'll be happy to never meet again. I was recently reminded of this experience, and after reading so many other stories just like it, I figured it was finally time to share mine. Honestly, I don't know how people usually verify their stories on here, but I actually have some video recordings from that night if any mods ever wanted to see them. Yeah, shit got real. This happened back in August of 2017. I was 23 at the time, and I had just moved back in with my mom while trying to get my life a bit more stable. My car had broken down right around the same time, which meant I was relying entirely on Uber to get around. And because my closest friends lived about 30 minutes away, those rides were becoming pretty frequent. That night, I was at my friend's place helping them move. After a long day of lifting boxes, sweating, and rearranging furniture, we decided to unwind a little bit. We made a Target run, grabbed some champagne and a little orange juice, because apparently I thought a guaranteed hangover sounded like a good plan for the following morning's work shift. Predictably, by later that evening, I was doubled over the toilet with a migraine, throwing up everything I had in me, head pounding, and regretting all of my life choices. As I was struggling, my friend started scrambling, trying to find me something to take for the headache. Of course, nobody knew where any painkillers were, but naturally, the stoner friend stepped up and offered me an edible instead. Now, for context, I hadn't touched weed in years, but I was so desperate to feel better that I took half of it, thinking it might mellow me out enough to get through the night. About 45 minutes passed, and I felt stable enough to call an Uber home. My head was still foggy, but I figured getting home was my best option before things got any worse. Because my friend's apartment complex was like a maze, I had to walk to the front to meet the driver since, as usual, no Uber driver ever seems able to find an exact address. I got in the back seat of the car, and that's when things started feeling off. The driver turned around to introduce himself, and immediately I caught this heavy southern drawl. It was thick, like molasses. Something about him just instantly made my stomach drop. You know when your instincts start screaming at you? Yeah, that. I told him right away that I wasn't feeling great, that I had a headache, and I just wanted to get home. That's when he pulled out an already open bottle of water and some random pills from the center console, offering them to me like it was no big deal. I politely took them from his hand, but made sure not to consume anything, shoving the pills into the crack of the seat and tossing the water bottle into the pocket in front of me. Every internal alarm I had was blaring at this point, but because of the edible, I was still floating around in this weird fog, which, if I'm being honest, made everything that much more terrifying. We started the 30-minute drive to my mom's house, and very quickly, the conversation took a dark turn. What started as him casually mentioning he'd done prison time soon escalated into him telling story after story about the good old days behind bars. He started talking about conspiracy theories, claiming the world was going to end by the end of 2017. His tone got more and more unsettling with every mile. It wasn't just idle rambling either. Every few minutes, he would circle the conversation back around to his bunker. "You should really see it sometime," he'd say. "Fully stocked, enough supplies to live for years." And then, like it was no big deal, he'd casually ask if I wanted to head there instead of going home. Over and over again, I kept responding with forced politeness, saying I had to work in the morning, maybe another time, and trying to brush it all off like I wasn't terrified. Then came the real crazy stuff. He started ranting about how the earth is actually flat, about government cover-ups, and then dropped something about giants in Kandahar, Afghanistan. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," he whispered, "but look up Kandahar giants on YouTube." His pupils were huge, his speech jittery. It was clear at this point that he was either high, unstable, or both. Somewhere during all of this, he casually mentioned that he had an arsenal of guns at his bunker, along with the fact that he grows his own opium out there too. Then, almost like he was just feeling me out, he asked if I had any guns. My nerves were shot, but I managed to blurt out, "Oh yeah, tons of them," just hoping it might make him think twice about doing anything too bold. At this point, panic was setting in full force. I started secretly texting my friends, sharing my live location, and even started recording parts of the conversation on my phone. I got about 7 minutes of footage, though the whole ride was more than a half hour. As we got closer to my exit, things got even worse. We were flying down the highway in the far left lane, and he made no move to start merging over to take my exit. I kept gently reminding him that the turn was coming up. He kept ignoring me, still going on about his bunker and how safe it would be out there. Finally, I lost it. I started screaming at him, telling him to pull over, that my mom was waiting for me, that I had work in a few hours, like my job meant anything to this crazed lunatic, or myself. He still wouldn't get over though. In full-on panic, I started kicking the back of his seat and threatening to open the door and jump if he didn't pull over immediately. Finally, at the very last possible moment, he exited the freeway. When he pulled up to the red light outside of my mom's apartment complex, I didn't wait. The moment the car stopped, I threw open the door and bolted. I don't think my feet even touched the ground more than twice before I was inside the building. Once I got inside, I tried to explain everything to my mom, But she was so distracted by the fact that I had taken an edible that she barely seemed to hear the terrifying part of the story. The next morning, once I was clear-headed, I sat her down, explained everything in full, showed her the video recordings, and we both filed a report with Uber. I still use ride shares occasionally, but never again when I'm alone, and definitely never while I'm impaired in any way. That night taught me real quick how fast things can spiral when you're not in full control of your senses. And to this day, I swear the universe knows when I'm high. It waits for those exact moments to throw something like this right at me. Three years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend in a one-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half-basement unit, so the bottom of all of our windows were level with the ground outside. It was also an older apartment, and not all of our windows would fully lock. One day, my boyfriend comes home from work while I'm laying on the sofa, and he immediately runs up to the window near me and looks out of it frantically. He then goes to look out every other window in the house, before then walking around the outside and looking in the windows. When he comes back in from this confusing exploit, I ask him, what the fuck is going on? And why is he being a spaz? I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you. He took off as I walked up. That's what he tells me. This was naturally very unsettling, but after discussing it and considering the time of day, it was around 2 p.m., as well as the number of people out and about around the complex at the time, we came to the conclusion that it was just a curious neighbor or someone passing by happening to glance in. With that, we pretty much forgot about it. If only that was the end. For the next couple of months, odd stuff happened here and there. Someone would knock on the door occasionally, then when I went to answer, there'd be no one there. I'd find things in my apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items would vanish. I really didn't think twice about any of it until one night. My boyfriend and I were arguing at around 1, maybe 2 in the morning, and admittedly we were being a bit loud. We were standing in the kitchen face to face. His back was to an open window with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window, thinking I saw the reflection of my face in it. But the window was open, and it wasn't my face that I saw. There was a man with his face pressed almost against the window screen, watching us silently. Given the fact that we were arguing and it was late, I thought for a moment that it might have been a concerned neighbor walking up to the window to speak to us. Our unit was adjacent to a main walkway for the complex, so I spoke to him. "Hello? Can I help you?" I asked a little aggressively, thinking a neighbor was intruding on our privacy. He responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face didn't change expression. He didn't blink or move, just looked right at me a way that I've never been looked at before or since. In this instant, I also realized because of the window being level with the ground, the only way this man's face could be where it was if he was laying on the ground outside the apartment, or crouched and contorted to look into the window. My heart sank. I buried my face in my boyfriend's chest and closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend, up to this point, thought I was messing with him. But when I buried my face in his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really someone at the window?" I whispered yes. He felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around. By the time he did, the man was gone. It was at this point I started to think about all the little odd occurrences that I'd been experiencing. I assumed the worst. I filed a police report with the man's description, and my brother loaded my apartment up with weapons to protect me, or at least inform this peeping Tom that I was armed. After that night, myself, my boyfriend, and my brother were on high alert. There were a couple of times where my brother came over that he saw a sketchy dude hanging around, and even one time he saw him at my window. He tried to follow the man discreetly, but he took off running as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night I had an experience with this man, I was sitting home alone on my sofa. My boyfriend was at work at a restaurant about 2 blocks away. He had picked me up from work about an hour earlier. We had sat on the sofa together for a little while when we got home, Then he kissed me, left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch while scrolling through Reddit for a while in silence. After about an hour of me sitting there, I hear a door creak open. Now, it's a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean a little to the left. I assumed it was one of my cats coming out of my bedroom, so you can imagine my shock when I lean over and see the door that's opening is the door to the water heater closet. I look to my right and see both my cats sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I look back to the door, and it's still creaking open, very slowly. It opens enough for me to see it, a set of fingers wrapped around the door, easing the door ever so gently to open it as quietly as possible. That was going to be a no for me, dog. I ran my ass barefooted out the door, into the snow, and down the street to my boyfriend's work. I called the cops from there. When everyone was back to check out the apartment, he was, of course, gone. After that, my boyfriend and I packed our went to stay with my parents, and 6 months later, moved about 1,000 miles away from that town. That was the end of it. I initially found this subreddit around that time, as I was trying to find other stories similar to mine, or people to talk to who had experienced something like I did. I had intended to write my story here eventually, and I figured after this week's events, I just had to. So, like I said, I live 1,000 miles away from where this all started. So a part of me thinks there's no way this person could have found me. But last week, I heard a knock on the front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package, so I figured it was a delivery driver and didn't answer. I'd just go get the package later. Then they knocked again. And again. The third one made me feel uneasy, so I waited a good 20 minutes before checking the door. When I did, there was no package, no note, no nothing. Someone was just knocking. Although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think back to my stressful experience in my last town. But 2 days ago, I went out to get groceries. I have this little patio and I go out there in the mornings just to chill or check on plants. And I've been known to leave it unlocked during the day on accident. Never thought of it as a huge deal until I came home from the store and the deadbolt to my apartment was locked. The deadbolt that can only be locked from the inside of my apartment. Period. I assumed somebody robbed me because I dumbly left my patio unlocked. I called my sister. I called my current, new boyfriend. I waited for people to be with me, and I went into my apartment through the sliding glass patio door. Nothing was out of place, nothing of value taken, and at this point my heart sank. Nothing was touched, nothing was stolen. Someone was just inside my apartment because they wanted to be inside of my apartment. I told my boyfriend about my previous stalker, and he's not taking this lightly like my past boyfriend did. We filed a police report. We checked for recording devices and cameras. He put Nest cameras up all over the place, and we're on high alert. I really, truly hope this is a coincidence, but if this man really followed me across multiple state lines, there's no one on this earth that I'm less interested in meeting. Last December, right around Christmas time, the engine in my POS car started knocking and eventually gave out. This, as well as the transmission, seeing as it would be more expensive to fix it than it would be to buy a new car. I scrapped it for a few $100 and put the word out I was looking to buy a car in the $2,500 to $3,000 range. I was, and still do, work 2 jobs, so I very quickly tired of having to bum rides to work. This fact led me to ignore a few red flags, but I'll get to those. One of my jobs is a corporate 9-to-5. The other is at an upscale gentleman's club. I put the word out about needing a car to my coworkers at both places. A month went by and I still hadn't heard anything. That's when a waitress at the club that I worked at pulled me aside. Hey, one of my customers offered me a really good deal on a car, but my parents bought me a brand new Escape, so I don't need it. The guy wants $1,000 for an '06 Chevy with low mileage. Do you want me to introduce you to him? It seemed like a godsend. I quickly agreed, and she led me over to the back of the bar to a booth where a tall, broad-shouldered older man sat. He looked to be around 60 years old, but he was still pretty huge, even sitting down. He looked like a retired army guy with a small beer gut, but lots of old man muscle. "I'd like you to meet Mark," she said. She introduced us as I sat down next to him. He didn't look at me or acknowledge me, and I got the feeling he was very awkward. My coworker excused herself and left us. I quickly explained that I was looking for a new car. That's when he finally looked at me and he began explaining the deal. That this was his brother's wife's car. They lived one state over, about 4 hours away. They initially bought the car for their daughter, brand new, but she had a baby a few years later and refused to drive it anymore because it was a two-door and the baby's car seat didn't exactly fit in the back seat. It had been sitting for years, but now their neighbor, who happened to be a cop, was threatening them, saying if they didn't put insurance on it or get rid of it, they'd be ticketed. So now they were looking to unload it as quickly as possible, hence the great deal. I was beyond excited. Mark and I chatted a little bit longer, albeit awkwardly, and eventually exchanged numbers. Before I went back to work, the subject of art came up, and he mentioned he'd always wanted to learn how to draw. I got excited because at the time, I was giving private drawing lessons to make extra money. He seemed interested after I showed him my portfolio on my phone, and he suggested maybe even knocking the price down a little bit in exchange for a few lessons. I wrap up our goodbyes and head back to work. He exits my job shortly thereafter. I'm ecstatic now. At 3 a.m., I'm finally back in civilian clothes, waiting inside the front doors for my ride, when Mark texts me. "Can you come to my house for the drawing lessons this week?" I politely tell him I don't feel comfortable with that, because he would have to pick me up and I'd be dependent on him to take me home too. He's a stranger. It just doesn't feel right. "All the more reason for you to get this car. You deserve it." I agree with this, brushing off the second half of the sentence. He's probably just a little lonely and trying to be nice. We set a date to meet up in a public place so I can check the car out. He plans on paying his niece to make the 4-hour drive the following Tuesday, 5 days from now. I agree. She doesn't mind because her parents are going to let her keep whatever money I pay for it, and Mark will pay her for gas there and back, plus a tip. I forget about Mark for a day or two, until the texts start. All hours of the day, the most random questions, but all of them pertaining to the car, the deal, and art, so I don't think too much into it. He's never been married. He claims he has Asperger's, which I found out later was a lie, and that he only has his brother and no one else in this life. I figure he's doing me a favor. I can answer a few harmless texts. But then I miss a few while I'm at work, and he spams me, getting progressively madder with each missed text. When I finally respond, I bitch him out, saying he has no right to my time or attention. He relents, saying he thought something bad had happened to me. That's all. He wasn't getting mad, he was scared. I think back to what he said about having Asperger's, and I think maybe I'm misunderstanding his texts, so I feel kind of bad. He stops for a few days. Then Tuesday rolls around. I bring my mom's boyfriend with me to the parking lot I'm meeting him and his niece at to look at the car. It's beautiful, and I love it. Mom's boyfriend says it's a great deal. I'd be dumb not to take it. I tell Mark that I want the car. He spent the whole interaction silent, seemingly intimidated by my mom's 5'3" boyfriend, which is actually kind of hilarious. The niece then drives the car back home. Because the title is in sister-in-law's name, I have to go to her house 4 hours away to have her sign the title over to me. Mark says he has a doctor's appointment at a hospital about 30 minutes from there, so I can ride down there with him and drive myself home. I agree to the plan, and we set the date for the next Wednesday. Wednesday morning at 6 a.m., my mom drops me at Mark's house. I assume his appointment is at 9 or 10 a.m. since he wants to leave so early, but he tells me it's at 1 p.m. I ask him, why the hell are we leaving so early if the hospital is only 3, maybe 3.5 hours away? He ignores the question, but I get my answer soon enough. This neurotic MF has to stop at every rest stop along the way. Every single one. It takes us 6 hours to get to the hospital, almost making us late for his appointment. We park the car and I tell him to ask one of the concierge people where we're supposed to be. It's a huge hospital after all. I'm not talking to one of those N-word concierges, he basically screams. He's getting frantic, and I'm starting to see how he's a little unhinged. But I'm 3 hours from home, and he's already got my $1,000, so I can't exactly back out now. I ask directions and find the elevator to the floor we need to be on, the 8th. Mark won't get into the elevator. He says he can't do them. They'll kill him. Randomly, a mentally handicapped man in a wheelchair next to us repeats the words, "It will kill us." Mark yells, "See? He knows." I'm out of patience now. I yank this man onto the elevator and we finally arrive at his appointment, just on time. As I'm waiting for this guy to wrap up, I nearly fall asleep in the lobby because he wouldn't let me sleep in the car, knowing that I'd worked till 3 a.m. the night before. I awaken to the sound of Mark screaming at the top of his lungs at the poor clerk behind the desk in the lobby. He's calling her every name in the book. She looks terrified and screams back that she's calling security. I hop up, grab him by the arm, and drag him, literally running back to the elevator. He opens his mouth to protest, but I tell him to shut the fuck up and get into the elevator. I'm in no mood for this. I refuse to be stranded across state lines because he had to land himself in the slammer for God knows what reason. We get off the elevator just as a team of security guards enter it and rush past them, doing our best to look normal. We finally get outside and I lose my ever-loving shit. What just happened? I was waiting for the doctor and I had to use the bathroom. He came to my room while I was gone, so he skipped me to go to the next patient. He wouldn't be back for an hour. Okay, what does the receptionist have to do with any of that? She was in on it. She could have told me he was an asshole. I just stare at him in disbelief. I fully realize I'm dealing with a mentally unstable individual. But I'm locked into this deal, and I'm 30 minutes from being able to drive the fuck away. So I just shake my head and walk back to his car silently. We get to his brother's house. The title gets signed over to me. All is good, except for the fact that the charging port in my new car doesn't work, and my phone is dead, so I don't know how to get home. I ask Mark if I can charge my phone in his car for a while. He says yes, and I begin the route to start following him home. It's getting really late at this point, and I'm so exhausted that I beg him to please skip a few rest stops. He skips 2, then pulls into the next one. He hops out of the car with a childish grin, saying, "You like what I did there? I skipped 2. F me, man." I check my phone, 50%. Good enough. I'm so done with this guy. I tell him goodbye and thanks, but I'm going to take off now. He seems confused. I ignore this, and I absolutely floor it home. That's when the texts begin again. "Zoom, zoom, little girl. Let's see if you find the secret of the wire. You won't make it far. There she goes." I'm thoroughly creeped the fuck out, but I ignore it. I get home, and as soon as the DMV is open, I go and I get my registration, file for insurance on the car, and that's when the texts start to get worse. "Tell your pimp you fucked up, little girl. Don't ignore me. You think that car is safe? Haha, you silly little girl. You're just a whore junkie. Wait till I go to the cops. You stole the car. You owe me $2,000 now. I'm talking to your pimp because you're too stupid to come up with that kind of cash. Bring it to me Monday, or I go to the cops and bust your little sex traffic ring." Variations of this message all day, until I block the number. I call Mark's brother just in case and tell him what's happening. He couldn't care less. He says to pay him. I said I did. He asked if I have proof, and I said yes. He gave you the money. Why would your wife sign the title over without getting paid? He asks if Mark knows where I live. I say no, and he says good. I start to get texts from a new number, this time claiming to be the cops. I know it's Mark, and I threaten to get a protective order if he doesn't stop. He goes ballistic, tells me he knows where I live, where my kids go to school, who my pimp is, where I get all of my drugs. And I know he's lying because I don't have kids, a pimp, or a drug problem. For the record, I'm also not a prostitute. I'm still scared shitless though, and all I can do is block this number too. I find myself always looking over my shoulder leaving work. I now sleep with a baseball bat. This man attempts to get me fired from my job, but he's laughed out of the establishment and banned. Months go by, and I start to be able to relax. I can still see if he texts me, even though he's blocked. It just goes to a different folder. I check it once in a while. For a few months, he sends completely normal texts, followed by psycho shit when I don't respond. I know you love me, and that's why you're doing this. Because your dad is dead, so you don't know how to love. It hurts me too. Let's buy your kids some toys. All the way to, you fucking whore. Zoom zoom. Do you like to ruin men's lives? Stop listening to your meth head stepbrother. Again, I have no kids. I realize he's just trying to scare me, and legally the car is mine. He can't take it from me. So I relax a little bit. One day, I happen to be awake when the mail lady comes. She knocks and tells me I have to sign for something. She hands me a manila envelope with the name Mark Smith as the return address, my full name on it, and the back is stamped with notify sender stamps, like 100 of them, all erratically placed. My heart stops. This dude knows where I fucking live, and as much as I'm dying to know what the letter says, I don't sign for it and tell her to return to the sender and explain the situation. I realize he probably just looked up my name online and he likely found 5 different addresses, then sent certified mail to all of them in my name in an attempt to verify which one I lived at. I think I thwarted his plan by not signing. Fuck that guy. Now, fast forward 2 months ago. I'm home alone and I get a call from a number I don't know, but it's local, so I picked it up. Hi, this is Officer Sanford with the City Fraud Division. Is this, before saying my full name? I say yes. Okay, I believe we have a mutual friend here. My heart sinks. I know he means Mark. Am I f***ed? Oh, don't worry. I'm on your side. I think this guy is off his rocker. I've been looking into it for a while and this just doesn't add up to you being guilty of anything but buying a car. Fucking justice. Turns out, Mark walked into a police station to report the car that he never owned, the one that I had the title to, stolen, and to report my, quote, prostitution ring. Once again, he was laughed out. So he wrote letters, lots of them, to the government, to the president, to the sheriff. And that's what led to a fraud investigator getting involved. He spoke to the sister-in-law and verified she signed the title over. Verified I had registration and insurance. Looked into my squeaky clean record. Even looked into my schooling and saw a very prestigious university. He eventually spoke to Mark face to face. This officer knew Mark was fucking crazy, so he had me write a brief account of my side of the story and advised me to get a restraining order. He told Mark to stay away from me, as well as the brother and sister-in-law actually, before closing the case. I now know that if Mark ever tries to fuck with me again, I've got Officer Sanford's number on speed dial. Mental disabilities aside, now it's time to leave me alone, bro. This happened back in 2005, when I was around 10, just about to turn 11, which would have made my sister 14. We come from a pretty small town in the UK where not much of interest usually happens, and our main attraction back then was the mall. My parents would quite often give us pocket money and let us take the bus into town to go to the movies located inside the shopping center on weekends. Being a video game obsessed little nerd, it was my ritual at the time to save up some money and buy discount pre-owned games from the game station store in the mall. There was something about the buildup of anticipation, reading those little booklets they used to have in game cases on the ride back home. I would be off in my own little world, reeling off facts about the game I'd learned from gaming magazines to my poor sister, who'd just smile and nod. humoring me until we got home and she could escape for a breather, while I locked myself in my room for a weekend of full-on, non-stop gaming. A few months prior to this particular trip, my grandma had moved from our old council house in a rundown part of town which was scheduled for demolition to a new one much closer to our family home. Between our two neighborhoods ran a main road with a bus stop near an underpass where we used to get off the bus on our way back from the shopping center. We'd then use the underpass to cross the road, which is surrounded by wooded areas on both sides, before walking the remaining 10 to 15 minutes home from the bus stop to our house. We lived in the kind of suburban zone where buses stopped only at the entrance to the estate and never actually ventured into the streets where the houses stood. Grandma's house was the closest of the two to the bus stop. On this day, I followed my sister off the bus, distracted with my stack of games in hand, my head in the clouds, looking at the screen grabs and the blurbs on the back of the cases as usual. I got the vague sense that my sister was a little tense, but I figured she was just in a rush to get back home and hop onto AOL Instant Messenger. It's worth pointing out that at this time, we were in the middle of a family feud, and my parents weren't exactly on speaking terms with my grandma. It had been a while since we had gone to visit her, and my dad had pretty much banned us from doing so. My sister decides to forego our usual route via the underpass and leads me instead toward the side where our grandma's house is located, heading the opposite direction of our own. This surprised me, and being an impatient little jerk that I was, I began questioning her incessantly as to why she was taking me to grandma's house when I just desperately wanted to get home to play with my games. She infuriated me even further by giving me vague answers like, "It seems like a good day for a walk," and "I just want to check how she's doing." Thinking back now, it makes a rock sink deep in my stomach, but I told her dad had forbidden it, and that I was going to walk the other way back to our house by myself, and that she could continue on by herself. Of course, being the older, street-savvy sister, she wouldn't let me, claiming our parents would get mad if I showed up alone, and that it was her responsibility to look after me. We kept walking in the direction of Grandma's house, and for the first time, I start to feel uneasy. I notice my sister checking over her shoulder and picking up the pace, telling me to hurry up, and I think it's weird she keeps very loudly exclaiming how everyone is waiting for us around the corner at Grandma's house. Eventually, we arrive, and Gran is surprised to see us. She invites us in. We have some biscuits, and I play with her dog for a while as we wait for our parents to come pick us up. Well, fast forward a month or so later, and the incident is more or less forgotten about by me when our town's first and only case of a missing child hits the news. It was on everyone's lips, and I even remember my parents and my friends' parents joining search and rescue parties, scouring the surrounding woodland. Tragically, the young boy who went missing was found deceased in the woods shortly after the first missing person report was filed. The whole town was devastated. The main suspect in the case took his own life before the police had a chance to question him. We were all shocked by what had happened. The boy had apparently been abducted while walking through an underpass on his way to school. This underpass was maybe 4 or 5 stops along from the stop my sister and I stopped at. I was a dense little kid and didn't connect the dots until much, much later, when my sister confessed to me that she had decided to take the detour to Grandma's house that day after getting an uneasy feeling from some creep that sat behind us on the bus, one who followed us off and stalked us before watching us enter our grandma's house and then disappearing in the opposite direction. I firmly believe that her sharp instincts and quick thinking are likely the reason that I'm still alive to tell you this story today. That and the fact that my grandma had to move to a council house which was miraculously so close to our bus stop. If this was the same creeper that had abducted that other little boy, then I know you're long gone at this point. But it doesn't make me feel any less lucky to know that we never had the pleasure of meeting. I used to be best friends with the youngest daughter of Joseph D'Angelo, a man that you may know better by the name the Golden State Killer. It actually still feels surreal to say that out loud. Back when I was growing up, he was just a name that I barely knew, some estranged father my friend rarely talked about. I had no idea who he really was or what he had done, and I don't think that I was alone in that situation. Looking back, the most unsettling part is realizing how close I was, not just to him through his daughters, but to unknowingly crossing paths with one of the most horrific predators this country has ever seen. I didn't grow up in some dangerous area. My life was pretty normal. Suburban California, with its neighborhoods, shopping centers, and a few horse barns scattered around town. Horses were my thing growing up. That's actually how I first met both of his daughters, at different stages of my life and through completely separate circles. I met the youngest daughter in junior high, and we quickly became best friends. We were inseparable for a time, and like most close friendships at that age, you start to learn bits and pieces about each other's families. She was rather open about the fact that her father wasn't really part of her life. She made it clear that the rest of the family kept their distance from him. Only she had any real contact. I never pried, but it always struck me as a little odd. There was this unspoken tension around him that neither of us really ever addressed. At one point early on in the friendship, my mother and I dropped her off at his house. I never went inside. We just pulled up and watched her walk up to the door. That house happened to be in the same neighborhood as my cousin, which at the time didn't mean a thing. But now, it's eerie how close it all was. As high school came and went, we drifted apart like people often do. But we reconnected in early adulthood, even crossing paths socially again. I actually introduced her to my roommate at one point. That situation ultimately blew up. And it was actually the linchpin that caused that friendship to come to an end permanently. Then, years later, I met D'Angelo's middle daughter completely separately through horseback riding. She was close with my trainer, and we became friendly through riding together. We're still friends with each other on Facebook, but we've never once discussed her father. I've always assumed it's something she simply doesn't want to relive, and frankly, I don't blame her. The part that sticks with me the most, though, and the reason that I even want to tell this story, is something that happened long before anyone knew who Joseph D'Angelo really was. It's something I didn't fully process until years later, when all the details about him started to come to light. About 15 years ago now, I was on my way to meet my trainer for a riding session. I was already dressed for it. Breeches, boots, the whole deal. And I decided to stop for gas on the way to the barn. I pulled into this unusually large gas station that always stood out to me because of how strangely spread out it was. Big open lot, pumps spaced a little too far from the store attached. Never many cars around, and this evening was no different. Besides a few employees inside, it was basically empty. Across the lot, parked several pumps away, was a man. Older, tall. At first glance, nothing about him seemed particularly threatening. He was far enough away that I figured we wouldn't even cross paths. But as my tank was filling up, he made his way all the way over to my side of the lot. He struck up a conversation with me, starting with horses. He asked if I rode, where I trained, and threw out a few equestrian terms. Enough to make it seem like he had some familiarity with the sport, but not enough to sound like someone genuinely involved. It was surface-level knowledge, buzzwords that anyone could pick up from just listening in on a few horse barn conversations. At first, I answered what he asked politely, but as his questions got a little more personal, where I trained, where I was headed, that's when I started to feel my unease begin to creep. Something about the way he kept steering the conversation just made me increasingly uncomfortable. Then he said something that completely changed my perception of the entire encounter. He casually mentioned that his daughters used to ride around here. That part caught my attention. In a community as small as the local horse world, it wasn't exactly far-fetched to think I might know them. I asked who his daughters were, and that's when he said their names. My old friend and her sister. Suddenly, everything started to click into place. I knew that this man, even without an introduction, was Joseph D'Angelo. Realizing who I was talking to made me drop my guard slightly. I figured maybe this whole odd encounter was just a socially awkward father trying to make a conversation about some shared connection. That's when I let him know that I knew who his daughters were, that I was even best friends with one of them during our childhood. His tone even shifted after that. He stopped asking so many personal questions and became far less pushy. We exchanged a few final words, and then I excused myself and returned to my car. I still remember the feeling that I had when I was driving away. That whole interaction had felt strange, but I tucked it away in my memory, figuring it was just one of those weird encounters that might happen from time to time. And that's where that thought stayed, in the back of my mind, up until 2018. I was out of state visiting my stepmom in Kentucky. We were having dinner at a sports bar when suddenly every TV in the place lit up with breaking news. A face, a name, all over every screen. Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, had been captured. I froze. It was like the air got sucked out of the room. My stepmom had to have asked me what was wrong 10 times, but I couldn't even form a sentence at first. I just kept staring, trying to process what I was seeing. My brain just couldn't reconcile the man I had spoken to that night with the monster that I was now seeing on TV. I pulled out my phone and started frantically checking news articles, confirming addresses, neighborhood details, street names, all the pieces I already knew but couldn't fully believe until I saw them written out. One of the most terrifying serial predators in California's history, and I had unknowingly stood face to face with him, having a conversation like it was just any other random day. That gas station encounter took on a whole new meaning after that. What if I hadn't known his daughters? What if I hadn't brought up the connection? Was he just being curious? Or was he feeling me out for something more sinister? That's the part that gets to me the most, because I'll never truly know how close I might have come to becoming a blip on his radar that night. Sometimes I still catch myself spiraling through those thoughts, the what ifs. How many people did he approach like that over the years, using his calm, casual, disarming style before revealing who he really was? I think about that chance encounter more often than I care to admit, and every time, I come back to the same realization. If just one thing had played out differently that night, I might not be here telling the story at all. There are some days where I just can't stop thinking about when I almost disappeared. It had to be about 30 years ago now, when I was in 7th grade. I had a bad problem with bullies. The kind of bullying that follows you onto the school bus, into the cafeteria. It pokes at you every day until eventually you just break. And I think that I did. I couldn't handle the daily ridicule anymore, so I stopped taking the bus entirely. Instead, I started walking, 3 miles each way every single day. It wasn't ideal, but it was my escape. A long sidewalk along a busy road, most of it straight, predictable. It felt far safer than the bus ever did. Back then, no one really raised an eyebrow at a kid walking alone for miles. My dad, who I lived with full time, didn't see any problem with it. My mom, who I stayed with on weekends, didn't even know about it. I never told her. I didn't want to give her another thing to worry about. For over half the school year, this was my routine. And while I wasn't exactly a fit or active kid, I got used to it. The walk became part of my life. Then came the day that I don't think I'll ever forget. It was a regular afternoon, halfway home, when I saw a car pull off to the side of the road up ahead of me, about 100 feet when I think back on it. I squinted. The car looked familiar. The shape, the color, it was my dad's car. Relief flooded over me. I figured that he must be here to pick me up. Finally, a break from walking. I smiled and jogged towards the car. As I got closer, a few small details started to stick out to me. My dad's car had a tan interior, but I could see this one was red inside. And his hair, wasn't it usually lighter than that? But my brain dismissed it. I was tired, hot, and ready to get off my feet. I swung open the passenger door, tossed my backpack onto the floorboard, swung my legs inside, and shut the door behind me. Without a word, we started moving. That's when I actually got my first look at this guy. It wasn't my dad. The man behind the wheel was much older, easily 20 years older than my father. His hair was dyed black, sitting stiff and unnatural. He wore a short-sleeved button-down shirt that looked like something my dad might have owned. His hands were planted rigidly on the wheel, and he smiled, this big, toothy smile that, under any other circumstance, might have felt grandfatherly. But in that moment, it sent a chill right through me. That's when I heard the soft click of the door locks engaging. My eyes froze on the lock for a few seconds before I slowly turned forward, now paralyzed with fear. He spoke in a calm and friendly tone. "Hello. I saw you walking and thought I'd give you a lift." I didn't respond. My mind raced, doing my best to stay calm, to not act scared. Just stay calm. We were still on the main road, about a mile from my neighborhood, half a mile from the turn that would take us there. He kept going. "You on your way home?" My voice barely worked, but I managed to nod and say yes. He smiled wider. "Where's your house? I'll take you there." I tried to sound normal as I told him to take the next right. Inside, my stomach was turning, but I forced my breathing to stay steady. As we approached the intersection, I made sure to point it out again. But instead of merging into the turn lane, he stayed in the lane that he was in. My heart pounded. I tightened my grip on my backpack straps, so hard that my fingers even went numb. Then, at that last possible moment, he swerved into the turn lane and made the right turn. I felt myself exhale slightly, but I knew that I wasn't safe yet. His tone shifted again. "Are you sure? We could go for a little ride instead, just for fun." The way he said it, it wasn't a suggestion. I forced my voice steady. "No, I need to get home. My dad's expecting me right now." I hoped it sounded more convincing than it felt. He gave a sigh, almost like he was disappointed. "Okay, maybe next time? We can meet at the same place tomorrow." I nodded quickly. "Tomorrow, yeah, sure. Anything to get through this." The next turn, the one that was into my neighborhood, was coming up fast. I pointed it out, again emphasizing that this was where I lived. Another stretch of silence hung in the air before he finally made the turn. A flicker of hope sparked. Maybe I was going to get out of this. But a new fear rose in my chest. This man can't know where I live. Before I could even figure out what to say, he spoke again. "You know, maybe it's better if I don't drop you right at your house. Don't want your dad to see me and get mad for giving you a ride. Could ruin our plans for tomorrow." Relieved, I seized on that suggestion. "Here's good then," I said, pointing to a spot in front of a nearby apartment complex, nowhere near my actual house. He pulled over, unlocked the doors, and I scrambled out as fast as I could. As I shut the door, he called out one last time. "See you tomorrow. Same time?" I forced myself to look back briefly. He was still smiling that same smile. I nodded. "Tomorrow." I closed the door and walked briskly away. I didn't run. I didn't act scared, although I was terrified. I just kept walking. I could hear his car idling behind me. My skin crawled knowing his eyes were still on me. It wasn't until I turned down a side path and out of his view that I heard the engine rev as he finally pulled away. When I glanced back, he was struggling to make a tight turn. For just a brief moment, our eyes met again. He gave a little wave before disappearing down the road. The moment he was out of sight, I ran. As fast as I could, backpack bouncing behind me, lungs burning. I sprinted around buildings, cut through backyards, hid between structures just in case he circled back. I must have stayed hidden for 10 to 15 minutes, but it felt like forever. Finally, convinced that he was gone, I darted home, using every shortcut I knew. I threw open that front door, locked it behind me, and collapsed on the floor. I was home, and I couldn't believe it. Later that night, I told both of my parents. My mother immediately insisted my dad start picking me up from school every day. He wasn't exactly thrilled about it. In fact, he thought I was lying to avoid walking anymore. In his defense, my panicked explanation wasn't very convincing. Yeah, Dad, it was just like your car, but with a red interior. And yeah, he looked like you, but older and with darker hair. It all just happened so fast. But I didn't care that he didn't fully believe me. I was safe, and I never saw that man again. I grew up in the South. Tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice, but along with that, it gets pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good will come out of the night. There wasn't exactly a local go-to spot to hang out, and places that were close to this were boring because you did them so many other times. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand that feeling completely. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a teen was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill my gas tank up, grab something to drink on, a cigarillo to puff, and I would just take off driving around until the sun came up. It was a way for me to just clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 a.m., and I also found them to be the right amount of spooky. Well, one night, I got far more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact that it was in the summertime because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable, chill night. So if I was to guess, I would say that it was around July, maybe August. I was cruising around like I always did, and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring, and I was in my zone. I decided to head down to a park just out of sheer boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but it is a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy like that. It's a normal paved road, but there's nothing really on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and after about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to get spread out further and further until it becomes no houses and just road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I liked this drive at night is because of how creepy it was, and I looked at it as some sort of adventure or whatever a teen sees it as. The park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods. So obviously at around 3 a.m., it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow, normal loop of a drive around the park. The night before, it stormed pretty badly. So badly that I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado touchdown. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty damn rough. Because of this, I came up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park. I figured it was only there because of the storm itself. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there was no way I could have gotten over it in my car. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and due to that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way that I just drove to get into the park. I knew that was super dangerous, and there was no way that having just under a year of licensed driving under my belt, I was going to be able to do it. At this spot on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense to just back up in the grass beside me a little bit, do a 3-point turn, and drive back the way I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out the wrong way since it was so late. So I started to back up off the road so I could get my car turned around. All was good until I went to pull back up onto the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was, as well as the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. Back tires completely stuck and spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and see that I had service. A super huge feeling of relief. I called my parents and told them what happened, and where I was. They were pretty pissed, but said they'll pay for the tow truck to come out and get me. My parents both drove small 4-door sedans, and they would have been zero help in this situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house and the rest of most human civilization. So I realized I would be stuck out there for at least an hour before someone was able to come get me. Freaky feeling, but I tried getting out of my head and just continued to listen to music and be on my phone in the car while I waited. Not really much more I could do anyway. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of everything else going on, but in front of where my car came to rest, there was a field that was full of the most deer that I think I've ever seen at once. Legitimately 40 or so deer in this field just walking around eating the grass. Now the field itself wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in that direction, I would have easily been able to hit one of them. So if I was to guess, they were like 30 yards out. This didn't really help with the creepy level going on. Looking out in front of your car and seeing 80 plus eye reflections staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall. But I was relieved it was just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, although I quickly got over it and started to just browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have been over it quicker than I was, because they all went back to eating and walking around once they figured out that I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing on my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck guy is on the way out. He's about an hour and a half from my location. Still to this day, I remember hearing that and having the thought, you have got to be fucking kidding me. I understood that I was the only one to blame for the situation I was in, so I couldn't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do was just make sure my doors were all locked, lay back in my seat, and take a nap to pass time as quickly as I could. So that's what I did. Now, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced that feeling before because I don't know how common it is. But there was this sixth sense alarm going off in my head telling me that I need to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in the situation I was in and the surrounding I was in is probably the worst case scenario. I sit up and immediately check around myself, but I see nothing. I looked through my car quickly for any sort of weapon and found a pocket knife. Okay, better than nothing. I was a bit scared at this point, and even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling is terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always just assumed they don't hang out in the same place for long. Not sure why I thought that, but I was surprised to see them nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they had heard any kind of update from the tow truck dude. I decided to not mention the feeling I was having because I didn't want to worry them more, and I also knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling. One that I had nothing to back up why I was feeling that way, other than just being spooked out in general. No update from the tow truck guy, so we all assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes because I felt like such a dick. They both had to wake up for work in a few hours. Now they had to spend a random $100 plus on this tow. And on top of that, they were already worried about me. I could tell they were annoyed at the situation, but like parents, they were concerned. I told them I'll make sure to tell them when the guy arrives, and I'm sorry. We hung up, and I looked up for my phone. I immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me were all completely perked up and staring in the same direction to the right of them. Let me remind you that there are around 40 deer in this field, and every single one of them were stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still, and looking at the same something. I turned on my high beams and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen at all. Nothing. I tapped my horn real quick. They didn't even budge or look my way. They were all still completely glued to whatever was by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far over the field. I know they were looking into the woods, but where I was at, I was only able to see them. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say that it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison started to run the opposite way. They were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds, that field was clear. I was petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car is what would be the safest thing to do, but it's the worst feeling in the world when you just feel like a sitting duck. My head was on a swivel. I was freaking out in every way possible. I assumed that it was a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it might have been the devil himself. I didn't know what to do. I knew the tow truck was close by, but I had no idea where. I began to shake because of nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me, all while still focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something, anything, to jump out of the darkness. 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's a tow truck. The lights on his truck felt like it was Jesus coming down from heaven to rescue me. He gets up to me, and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he has a gun on him. I told him very quickly what had just happened, and that something is definitely out here nearby. He let me know that he had a shotgun in the truck and assured me that it was most likely a bear or a bobcat. He gave me the whole, "They're more scared of you than you are of them" bullshit. The tree in the road was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way with his truck, and then he attached my car to his and pulled me out of the spot that I was stuck in. He was pretty nonchalant about what I just experienced, but I was pretty badly shaken up from it. The whole time he was doing his thing, I still had my eyes glued out in that field waiting for something. The tow truck guy was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me to follow his truck out of there and onto the main road again. I got back in my car and was more ready than anything to get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot I was in, and I still had my head on a swivel, still completely shaken up. As we were driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still see the spot that I was stuck in partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watched in my rearview mirror as a man came out of the tree line behind where my car was, and then walk into the middle of the road to watch us drive away. My heart stopped beating for just a second. Legitimately, I lost my breath, and my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely scared I was in this moment. I couldn't see any sort of details like what he looked like or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care. The feeling that I felt driving away from that spot, knowing he was right there the whole time watching me as I was freaking out looking around, watching me as I was completely alone for a terribly long time, maybe even coming right up to the window and watching me as I slept. That's a feeling that I can't necessarily put into words. All these years later, and it still messes with me quite a bit. The entire time we were driving off, as long as I could see him, that man didn't move once he came to rest in the road. He just watched us. A million things went through my mind. I was scared there may have been multiple people up the road waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn like crazy to get the tow truck guy to stop or not. I decided that all I wanted to do was get out of there, more than anything in the world. The second that we finally got out of the park and I was able to be on a 2-lane road again, I flew past the tow truck driver and did nothing below 70 the entire way home. I flew through stop signs, even blew through a few stoplights. I absolutely did not care. The only thing on my mind was making it home. I got home, ran inside, and very quickly acknowledged my parents, saying sorry and thank you before heading to my room. I didn't get a single second of sleep the rest of the night. I was searching for any sort of records of things happening in that area. Police reports, strange encounters, anything similar to the story that I just experienced. I came to the conclusion that that man was some sort of squatter or a homeless person. I read many things online how it's common for homeless in rural areas to build shelters out in the woods, which does make sense to me entirely on why they would do that. But obviously, the unknown is the scariest part of it all. What if he wasn't homeless? What if he had plans to hurt me? what if, what if, what if? There's so many possibilities of what could have happened, but the outcome that did happen is what I'm most grateful for. I didn't tell my parents the story until many years after it happened, and I was already an adult and moved out. It freaked them the fuck out too when I told them. I never went back to that park, ever. Even though I no longer live by there, I still have no desire at all to ever go back there. I don't think that I could bring myself to do it even in broad daylight with a ton of people around. I also made the decision to stop doing those late night cruises. I did a couple more after this experience, but even with people, that uncomfortable feeling and being on edge just never went away. I'm now in my late 20s, and while I still enjoy a relaxing drive on occasion, but once the clock strikes midnight, you won't catch me on the road. This occurred about 8 years ago now. A close friend and I were on fall break from college and decided to go to an ODESZA concert in downtown Chicago. We grew up in the suburbs, so going to Chicago to have fun was pretty common for us. We had a great time at the concert and decided to Uber home since we weren't close to any train station. My friend told me Uber wasn't working for him at the moment, so that's when I opened up the app, but this was literally my first time ever using it, and I accidentally called an Uber pool, not knowing what it was. My friend saw that and was like, it really doesn't matter. So the driver picks us up from right outside the concert venue. There were a lot of intoxicated people around, as one could imagine post-ODESZA show, but we were pretty sober, as all we did was smoke some weed, which we were rather used to. We get in the car and everything's going normally, but we didn't immediately notice the direction the driver was taking us, as we were wrapped up in talking about the show. Turns out, the driver was going to the south side of Chicago, which we realized after some time by looking at the maps. But our suburb was exactly the opposite direction of this lengthy drive south. We decided to attribute this to the fact that it was an Uber pool and shrugged it off as best as we could, until we picked up this next passenger. To be honest, this girl scared us. I don't like to judge people, but she scared us just by looks, as well as how she spoke. Once the girl got in, we asked the driver where we were going first, to which he stopped answering. Next thing I know, my phone lit up and said the Uber trip was canceled. And for this duration of the ride, Uber had no record of me being in the car. I asked the driver what the deal was, and again, he didn't answer. The girl and the driver 100% knew each other, as they were calling each other by nicknames. The girl was being weird and seemed to be doing some hand signals to him. All this while we proceeded to drive further south into this neighborhood, which was probably the sketchiest neighborhood I've ever seen in my life. I didn't realize neighborhoods like this even existed. Every house was completely wrecked. There were no street signs on most streets. Nearly all of the streetlights were out. Homeless people lying on sidewalks. And we were starting to see beat-down warehouses and alleys everywhere. This was by far the scariest area that I've ever seen. Once we started seeing all of this, our hearts dropped because the driver still wouldn't respond to us. My friend then looks over to me and whispers, "We need to get the fuck out of here." To which I replied, "Dude, look where we are." So we just stayed in the car. Then we get driven down this alley behind a warehouse where the streets ended, and there were just fields beyond it. The driver's going down this alley at like 2 miles per hour, but he keeps going. The girl and Uber driver were clearly discussing something serious, but we couldn't make it out since they were using mostly signals. At that point, our hearts sank even harder, and we literally both thought we were going to be killed in this alley. Or at best, someone was going to get in the car and rob us. That's when the driver stopped, and the doors unlocked. I was in complete shock with a pale face when all of a sudden my friend says, "Hey, I'm completely sober, and I'm about to fucking call 911. I can only assume that this driver was waiting around the concert to pick up some wasted people who would allow this to happen. But we weren't them. Now, my friend's admission, he was serious about. He had 911 dialed on his phone. That's when the Uber driver looks back at us in the rear view, clearly not anticipating what my friend had said. He looks at the girl, and the girl's pretty shocked too. She shakes her head no, before simply saying, "What the f***?" and getting out of the car. Without a word, the driver then drives out of this neighborhood and onto the highway towards our suburb. All of a sudden, my Uber app gave me a notification saying we were now in a ride. And at this point, the driver starts talking to us again. Now, obviously not giving us any answers, but saying that he's driving us home. We were stunned, asking this guy what the f just happened, and he refused to answer. All he said was that he was taking us home. About 20 minutes later, we made it home safely, and that's when I took the time to report the Uber driver for that ride. We think that he must have been trying to wait for wasted people to pool so that he could get away with this, but he realized we were too big of a risk when it came time to do what they were going to do. We've accepted that we're part of a mugging scheme, and got lucky that we decided not to get faded at the concert. I can't speak for my friend, but I know that I had anxiety for weeks after this. But I know now just how sketchy some areas can be, and how to be a little more safe when in Chicago. Specifically by not calling an Uber pool outside of a concert. It really is strange to me that people opt to live sketchy lives like this, and victimize other people. But it was an eye-opening experience. I'd say that an otherwise fun night was properly tainted, but at least there was a lesson learned. This story happened well over 10 years ago, when I was still a student. It has a few graphic details of animal harm and graphic violence, so discretion is advised. A bit of backstory. As with most students, I was always broke, and had a few ventures apart from my part-time job to bring me extra money. One of them was house and pet sitting. I've always had a love for animals, so when this couple contacted me to ask me to house sit for them for the last few days before they returned from their overseas trip, as the last sitter bailed on them and their 6-month-old golden retriever puppy would be alone, I jumped at the opportunity. The fact that they promised to pay me the full 2-week fee for staying there less than a week made it all that much more appealing. Little did I know how bad that all of this would turn out. I got the details, got the keys from the agent, and headed over to the house as it was already after 5 p.m. and nearly dark, as it was early spring if I remember correctly. I got to the house, which was a really nice place, but it bordered on a not-so-good area that was and still is prone to crime. Home break-ins, robberies, etc. Even knowing that, I wasn't really bothered, because, I figured nothing was going to happen to me. I know, young and naive. The first 4 nights went without a hitch, watching movies, jacuzzi, and just generally enjoying myself. The owners would have returned on the 5th day, fairly late at night. I got a call from them about 10 p.m. saying their flight got delayed, that they were going to stay in a hotel and do the 3.5-hour drive back the following morning. They asked if it would be too much trouble if I slept there again that night. It was fine by me. I was already there and had my overnight bag still in the car. I called my dad to let him know of the plans because I was still staying with my parents, and he specifically asked what the address was. Now, I normally didn't give them details like that because I was old enough to look after myself, but I still believe to this day that giving my dad the address that night likely saved my life. I eventually got to bed at around 1 a.m., and it felt like I had only slept 5 minutes when I was awoken to the sound of a window breaking. I could hear movement in the house and what sounded like footsteps running down the hallway. The first thing I did was grab my phone and just hit redial. Thanks to my old Motorola phone, redialing was as simple as pressing one button, and that connected me with my dad, who was the last number that I had called. I remember laying there praying that that phone call woke him up. I then dropped the phone in between the headboard and mattress in case my dad picked up. That way he could hear what was going on. I had barely done that when the first guy stormed through the bedroom door. I could see his silhouette and the knife that he held in his hand. When he saw me, he instantly raised it and came right for me. Now, one thing for those that are unfamiliar with South Africa, where I come from, and the crime there. Robberies and home invasions are usually very brutal and violent. People will get murdered or tortured if they retaliate in the slightest or not cooperate fully with the robbers. Out of instinct, I raised my legs back when he came at me, and when he came within reach, I kicked both legs out as hard as I possibly could. Now, I'm not a small guy. I'm 6'3", and at that stage in my life, I weighed about 100 kilograms, or 220 pounds, and I was fit and strong. My time not spent at uni or work was usually at the gym. So when I kicked out and made contact with the guy, he completely lifted off the ground and nearly shot into the wall. Luckily, the knife also shot out of his hand. Before he got the chance to get up, I was on top of him, driving my right knee into his face and in return his head into the wall. I felt like my life depended upon it, so I put in just a little extra force. The guy dropped like a sack of potatoes, but before I could jump up, I heard the sound of a pistol cock, and that made me freeze. It felt like all the blood had drained from my body, and I had become numb. I remember the only thing that went through my head was that if he shot me, I would rather die than be disabled or dependent upon other people to have to take care of me. This man stood behind me with the pistol pressed up against my head for what felt like hours, but was likely less than 10 seconds. I didn't move a muscle, and he eventually said in very broken English to get on the bed face down. I panicked, but I also thought that if he really wanted to shoot me, that he already would have done so. So I did as he said. He threw a blanket over me, and I turned into the fetal position with my back up against the wall, just so if they wanted to stab me, that I had my legs and arms in front of me, doing the best to protect my body. Now by that time, I had forgotten that I had even called my dad, and the guy that I need was still down. I heard a third guy come into the room, and I could hear what sounded like Portuguese to me. I couldn't understand what they said, but I recognized it, as we used to go to Mozambique on holiday a lot, and that is the main language spoken there. The one guy tried to get the guy that I put down off the ground, while the other started to ransack the house, shoving valuables into a big bag. It was about at this time that I heard tires screeching and a car approaching at what sounded like Mach 1. The car skidded to a halt right in front of the gate, and that's when I heard someone scream. I knew right then that it was my dad. The three men inside the house panicked. They all ran out the back door and tried to jump the fence. My dad opened fire, shooting in their general direction. Now, I know my dad missed them on purpose because if he wanted to hit them, he would have, as he is not one of, but the best shot that I know. And I'm not just saying that because he's my dad. He's ex-Army Special Forces. He represented South Africa in the Clay Pigeon World Championships a couple of years. He's got various regional pistol and rifle championship titles and is a gunsmith by occupation. I've seen him hit golf balls at 50 meters with his pistol. Once I had my wits, I grabbed the house keys and pressed the gate remote, and my dad called the police when he came in. I met him at the front door and we walked out to the car to wait there for the cops. It took them over an hour to get there, some excuse of no vehicle available. And by the time they had reached the house, I had calmed down, and that's when I started to look for the dog. I couldn't find her anywhere. I grabbed a flashlight from my dad and started scanning the surrounding yard, and as I got to the corner, I could see her lying on the ground. I got to her and, unfortunately, she was dead. Later, autopsies would reveal that she was poisoned, and the police found pieces of meat laced with poison near the fence. Poisoning is actually a pretty standard practice in my country for dealing with dogs at a house or an area that's targeted for a break-in or a robbery. I was fuming, and yet also terribly sad. The police were also pretty useless, and they had a don't-give-a-sh type attitude. They barely took our statements. By the time it was starting to get light out, I retrieved my bag, phone, and locked the house as well as I could without touching anything, and then drove home behind my dad. Only when I got home did I get the story from my dad's side. He said he answered my call, only to hear the shouting and what sounded like fighting going on, and when I didn't respond, he flew out of the house and raced over. This really should underscore just how lucky I was that he asked me for the address the previous night. Now, my dad got there pretty quickly, and he said that he stayed on the line the whole time, only hanging up when he finally reached the gate. My parents' house is about 10 kilometers or 6 miles from where I was, through a residential area. It's what I would normally call about a 15-minute drive. But the call duration itself was only 9 minutes. I met the detective there later that day, gave my statement, they took fingerprints, and the owners got back at around the same time. The rest of the day was a blur for me, as I came down from both the shock and the adrenaline rush. Now, this isn't exactly where the story ends. About 7 or 8 months later, I got a call from the detective telling me they caught the guys, and I had to come do a lineup to point them out. I specifically told her that I didn't see any of their faces as it was dark, and after the guy held the gun at my head, I was under the blanket and didn't see anything further. She assured me that they caught them on fingerprints and will show them to me beforehand, which might not be ethically the correct way to do it, but they wanted to have as much evidence as possible against them. You'll understand why in a minute. I got to the police station, and unlike how you see it in the movies, there's no one-way glass or separate room. They bring 3 guys into the room and make them stand against the wall. The one which I was later told was the leader of the group, which was the one that I had kneed, looked at me in a way that I'd never been looked at in my life. It was absolutely filled with hate. He had the eyes of someone that would slit your throat and not blink an eye. His name was Joseph Dragon Sambo. He pulled his hand up to his neck and made the slit my throat gesture. I think you know the one. We left the room, and the detective gave me a copy of his rap sheet. Amongst other things, 4 counts of murder, I think 8 or 9 for attempted murder, multiple assaults, aggravated assaults, and over a dozen cases of home break-ins and robberies. I was shocked. The detective told me that had I not taken him out first and fast that night, I would have definitely not gotten away so lightly. 3 days later, I get another call from the detective saying that I should be careful, as Joseph Sambo had escaped custody and they hadn't caught up to him yet. I wasn't exactly worried, as the robbery wasn't at my house and I had changed cars, so I didn't think he was going to find me. Also, in the meantime, I got my firearm license and carried my own pistol on me 24/7. I didn't hear anything after that until about 2 years later, when I saw the detective in the grocery shop. We started talking about the case, and she told me that Joseph Sambo had been killed during another home invasion. He broke into the wrong house, and the owner was apparently waiting for him, pistol in hand. Shot him 1 time in the stomach, and another time in the neck. Thanks to the slow response time of emergency services and police, he bled out on the guy's living room floor, ridding society of a piece of human garbage. I'm just going to say that this whole ordeal has made me more vigilant. It's heightened my situational awareness and made me a little more paranoid too. I double and triple check all doors and locks each night. Also, thanks to my heightened situational awareness, this has allowed me to remove myself from a few potentially dangerous situations in the years after this incident. But it's also robbed me of my peace of mind. I've since immigrated to a safer country, but I still wake up sometimes at night with a jolt if I hear a noise coming from outside my room. So, to keep up with the tradition of this sub, Joseph, we're never going to meet again as you've passed. But to his cronies or anyone that wants to try something similar, I'll be happy to arrange your swift departure and reunion with Joseph, all in hell. And to Joseph, I hope you died in agony for what you did to Daisy. To put this into context, I'm a 22-year-old girl living in New Zealand. I suffer from anxiety and tend to shut down in stressful situations. I become rather overwhelmed when I'm not sure how exactly to deal with something. This story took place about 4 years back while we were still in the midst of COVID. One evening, I was waiting at my bus station to catch a bus home. I'd had a long day at work and my legs were in pain. All I really wanted to do was get home and watch some YouTube in bed. It was getting dark out. The sun had almost completely disappeared from the sky. As I was listening to some music in a rather deserted area of the bus station, a man considerably larger than myself sauntered up and sat down directly next to me on the bench. Something I didn't really think much of at that moment. Now, to put this into perspective, I'm roughly 110 pounds. This guy must have easily been pushing 250. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that this guy was now staring at me, and this began to make me feel a little uncomfortable. But in my mind, I rationalized it as him looking at my mask. He wasn't wearing one himself, and I know some people have rather polarizing ideas about wearing masks in the first place. I tried to ignore this and acted busy on my phone to avoid talking. As I said, I had had a long day at work. But almost like clockwork, this man began to talk at me, and I pulled out my AirPod to listen to what he was saying. When I took it out of my ear, the AirPod fell and landed on the ground, to which he picked it up for me. But instead of handing it back, he held onto it and stared at it for a few seconds, before eventually giving it back to me. I can tell you now, I was already getting bad vibes from this guy. The conversation itself went something like this. "Your eyes are beautiful. Did you get them from your mom or your dad?" My mom, I guess. I kept my reply short to try to signify that I wasn't in the mood for talking, but he just continued. "What bus are you catching? Where do you live?" I laughed nervously and told him I didn't feel very comfortable sharing where I lived with a stranger, but I told him it was farther up north. He then said, "Why? It's not like I'm going to attack you. Isn't it really fancy up there?" This is where I began to feel seriously uncomfortable, and I can remember beginning to shake. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which I said yes, and he proceeded to ask if I planned to marry him, to which I laughed and said yes. "Oh, it kind of sounds like you're just rooting him. Are you sure you want to marry him?" I was shocked and looked at him before telling him again, "Yeah, I do plan to marry my partner." He then asked, "How old are you?" I don't know what came over me, but I told him I was 21, to try to make it come across that I was old enough to stand up for myself. His next question was, "Are you on the pill?" "I'm sorry, man. I don't feel comfortable sharing that and don't see why you need to know." "Oh, so you use condoms instead, eh?" I wanted to walk away, but I felt stuck to the bench, and I couldn't move a muscle if I tried. I was uncomfortable and confused as to why he was even asking these questions. "Do you have someone waiting for you at the bus stop, or are you walking home? How far do you live from the bus stop?" This is the question that made everything click into place, and I realized this guy had some malicious intent on his mind. He's not being friendly. Far from it. This man is going to follow me home and either rape me or kidnap me. I started to really panic and started desperately looking for onlookers. A young man, right around my age, walked out of the public restroom and overheard the last bit of that conversation. This at least caused him to look at the predator rather skeptically. I knew then I'd at least have someone to help if I just asked for it. But I didn't. At this point, I remembered another story that I had heard about on Reddit, about a highly pregnant woman and her daughters being followed to their car in an empty car park by an older man. This lady was stressfully trying to find her keys in her purse as this man was standing beside her daughters on the opposite side of the car, just making small talk with them. Eventually, this man got impatient, and he walked away before she'd found her keys. Someone commented on her story saying that this was a popular thing, that he was waiting for her to unlock her car so that he could get in and control her via threats to her children. It occurred to me that I should skip my bus and catch another one at a later time. That's exactly what I did. This man kept trying to ask where I lived, and I continued to refuse telling him where. He also continued to ask how far I lived from the stop, and if my partner was waiting for me. I deflected all of his questions, and after 40 minutes, he began to get grumpy and walked away from the station. He wasn't there to catch a bus at all, but it seems like he was there to prey on a young woman at a bus stop. I caught my bus about 10 minutes after he left, and I ran home, where I completely broke down and cried in the arms of my boyfriend. The next morning, I was so stressed that I contemplated taking the day off of work and staying in bed for the rest of it. I was absolutely petrified. I didn't stay home though. I went to work, and that was the first moment that I thought about sharing this story, although it's taken me a couple years to get there. After all of this had sunken in, I was able to clearly and plainly realize that following other people's let's not meet stories had kept me safe when coming face to face with a predator. I normally read these types of accounts for the entertainment they provide. I never once thought that one would help me get out of my own sketchy situation. I remember back in elementary school, we would randomly get these early dismissal days every so often. I think that it had something to do with staff development or meetings or something like that. But as a kid, all it basically meant was we got out early that day. It wasn't quite a half day, but still an hour or two earlier than regular dismissal. I remember sitting quietly at my desk one of these days, working on some math problems, when the classroom phone rang and I turned to my friend. I made a joke and said, "Watch it be for me." We all stared at the teacher as she answered the phone because, let's be real, 90% of the time, when that phone rang, it meant someone was getting to leave early. But that's when her eyes met mine, and my joking stopped cold. I felt this weird jolt in my stomach. I remember being an anxious kid, so my mind immediately jumped to the worst case scenarios. Oh no, someone must have died. The teacher said a few things into the phone and then looked dead at me and asked, "Hey, when are you getting off the bus today?" It was a strange question, even to my 7 or 8-year-old mind. Mainly because my mom, who was my main parent at the time, knew when I'd be home, especially on those early dismissal days since she had to leave work early to meet me. Still, I just said, the normal time. The teacher spoke into the phone for a few more seconds and then hung up. When she walked by my desk, I asked her what that was about, and she told me that my parent had just called to double check what time I'd be getting off the bus. Again, weird, but I didn't think very much of it. I'm sure I was too concerned with recess or lunch at that point. Well, later that afternoon, I got off the bus and walked home like usual. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. When I walked through the front door, my mom greeted me and helped me take off my coat. She asked me how school went and what we learned, the normal parent spiel. That's when I casually asked her, "Why did you call the school to ask what time I was getting off the bus?" That's when her whole expression changed. She went visibly pale and told me, "I didn't call the school." I told her everything. The call, the weird question from the teacher, and how she said that it was one of my parents. That's when my mom went into panic mode. She started making all sorts of fast, frantic calls. And while she didn't say anything to me, I could feel in the air of the house that something was wrong. About 20 minutes later, my stepdad came home early from work. Then, not long after that, a single state trooper pulled up in front of our house. I was terrified at that point. I thought I had somehow done something wrong. But the officer sat down with me and calmly asked me a few questions. "Recently, when you've gotten off the bus, has anyone tried to talk to you? Have you seen any unfamiliar cars parked nearby? Maybe ones that don't have kids in them? Has anyone offered you a ride?" I told him no to all the questions. I hadn't seen or noticed anything suspicious. We lived in a quiet, older neighborhood, filled mostly with retirees. It never felt unsafe to me. After the questioning, my mom told me to pack an overnight bag. It was my dad's weekend for visitation. When he came to pick me up, I overheard the trooper grilling him with questions from the top of the stairs. My dad sounded as confused and concerned as anyone else. Eventually, I left with him for the weekend, and while we were together, my dad taught me a bit of self-defense. At the time, I thought it was cool, although clearly I didn't fully understand the context or what had nearly happened. Time went on. No more questions, no more updates. Life just went back to normal, and eventually, I forgot about the whole thing. Well, fast forward to today, I was listening to Lazy Masquerade on YouTube. He'll sometimes narrate creepy stories from Reddit, and something about his tone or the content itself triggered this memory deep inside the vault. I texted my mom to ask about it, and what she told me sent chills throughout my entire body. She said that she had learned that someone had called the school pretending to be my dad. Whoever this man was, he knew my full name, my dad's full name, as well as my mom's. He kept insisting that my mother couldn't get out of work in time and had asked him to pick me up at the bus stop instead. Apparently, the school never thought to call my mom to confirm. I now believe the only reason that I wasn't abducted that day is because I told the teacher I'd be getting off the bus at the normal time, which on a regular day would have been around 3:15. Even though on this day, due to early dismissal, I had actually gotten home much closer to 1:45. By the time this creep went to find me, I was already home safe. I think that one nondescript answer likely saved my life. The more I've thought about it over the years, the scarier it's become. Because whoever that guy was, I don't think he was some random stranger. He knew too much about my family to just have stumbled across that information. It had to be someone who had been close to us at some point, either a family member or maybe a friend of the family. And that realization keeps me awake at night. Even worse, we still live in the same house. We still have the same extended family. And now I have a little brother who's roughly the same age that I was when all of this happened. I pressed my mom for more details, and after a long pause, she admitted something that she had felt in her gut for a long time. She's pretty sure that this was done by an abusive ex-boyfriend of hers. Now, apparently this guy was around when I was young, but I don't remember him at all, although I remember whispers about his name growing up. She told me that he had outright threatened her after their breakup, said in no uncertain terms that he was going to take me. She never thought he'd actually try, but she feels in her bones that he did. And the only thing that stopped him was a random twist of scheduling and a lucky answer from a very confused little kid. It's been years since that day, but I still get goosebumps when I think about how easily things could have gone differently. How I might not be here to tell this story. How close I came to being just another milk carton kid. Like I said, I don't remember this man. I wouldn't know him if I passed him on the street. But I know he exists, and I know what it is that he tried to do. This encounter took place not too long ago, and it solidified in my mind why I will always close the blinds at night, and why, even in a quiet suburban neighborhood, you should always lock your door. I've been reading creepy stories online since I was about 12, when I first discovered Tumblr and Reddit. Creepypasta, no sleep, and of course, let's not meet. So I have long since taken to checking all windows and locks before I go to bed at night, and closing blinds and curtains for fear I might look out to see some creep in a clown costume with a knife in my garden, or a child with their head held at an unnatural angle. I always sort of wished I had a creepy encounter, just so I could write about it. But if I never have another experience like this for the rest of my life, it'll be too soon. So, obligatory context. This nice suburban neighborhood, as I say, is home to my parents. Little town in Cheshire, England. Quiet street where we all know each other. Low crime rate except one house which has been heavily burgled twice in about 10 years. Both opportunistic break-ins. Once because the keys were near the door and the invaders smashed a small pane to reach them before letting themselves in. The other time, they'd left their blinds open overnight, leaving laptops, wallets, and both car keys on full display. Anyway, I don't live with my parents anymore, but I was back in town and staying with them for a few days over summer. I was sat in the kitchen, which faces onto the street, and working on my laptop, just glancing up occasionally to watch people pass by walking dogs or strolling with a pram. I'd seen something moving in my peripheral, so, like every time, I looked up hoping to see a dog walker or one neighbor and her newborn grandson. But this time, nope. 2 people. A man in a semi-casual suit, and a woman in plain jeans and a blouse. But they were moving awkwardly. The woman had her head craned over to one of her shoulders, and her arm on that side was bent backwards and unnaturally held upward with her hand rhythmically flicking. Her other arm randomly but smoothly glided about, guided by her elbow. It was a bit like when you try to push two magnets together at the same point of polarity. That's the only way I can really describe it. I have friends with epilepsy, and I've never seen them contort or flick like that. Not even their myoclonic jerks. The man looked more like one of those dancing inflatables you see at a used car dealership. That's truly the only way I could describe his movements. They walked past my parents' house, and I instinctively called out to my cat, checking that he wasn't outside with those weirdos. I found him upstairs in my old room. He was looking out the window, and as I followed his gaze, I see two of the kid neighbors in the double-burgled house waving across to me. Well, to my cat, but I waved back all the same, and they were in their parents' upstairs bedroom window. I went downstairs to tell my parents about the strange moving people, and my dad just furrowed his brow, asked if they were gone, and said to double-check that the door was locked. I headed back to the kitchen to check on our back door. This door doesn't have any windows in it, so you can understand that I nearly jumped out of my skin when, as I put my hand on the door handle, it was pushed down from someone on the other side. I push on the door immediately, keeping it shut before anyone can push it from the outside. I also must have screamed because I hear my dad call back. I hear his footsteps coming through the house. Then I hear a loud gasp on the other side of the door and out of the kitchen window. Guess who I look up to see making a retreat? Both creepy moving dude and dudette. By the time my dad's made it through the house, they're gone. He doesn't seem to believe me, although he doesn't seem exactly doubting either. He says he's never seen them before and takes a free pop at me for being discriminatory against potential house guests with movement disorders. We make jokes like this because I had a movement disorder as a kid, and one time, a parent wouldn't let me into her son's birthday party because they would be playing Simon Says, and I made it difficult for the other kids apparently. I digress, but at this point, these people were gone. Now, I don't sleep well, due to said movement disorder actually, and those scary stories that I read meant I always listened to the excessive creaking in this house and noises on the street outdoors at night, likely people walking home drunk, or foxes mating. Most of the sounds are quiet though, so imagine my shock when my straining ears are suddenly attacked by a child's scream. It takes me a second to locate the sound, and then another to lurch from my bed to the window, looking straight over to the upstairs window, the same one where not 12 hours ago, my neighbor's children were waving to me from. I scanned down the house and saw their front door wide open. I shouted out to my parents, hoping to wake them up as I flew down the stairs in my PJs, with 999 already dialed on my phone to report this likely home invasion before I do anything else. I'm remembering to scream fire, not burglar, as I now stride across the road, attempting to wake other neighbors and gather support en masse. There are 2 kids and a teenager in that commonly burgled house, kids who I babysat for 10 years, and one of them just screamed at 2 a.m. while their front door is wide open. I make sure to say this out loud to the emergency responder over the phone. As I near the door, I can see a figure moving inside, frantically. So after telling the phone responder what's happening and answering their brief set of questions, I shout into the door from a safe distance some phrases the police gave me to say. The police are on their way. We're right outside and we're getting help. Is anyone hurt? And to tell the intruders, we know you're in there. Please don't hurt anyone. The police can help you. I get a response from the upstairs window and step back into the road to see the mother holding all 3 kids in her arms. She tells me the middle child, who's 9, found intruders on the stairs when she went to get a drink in the night. The little girl, Imogen, tells me they're like clowns. Clowns? Now, this extra detail is the straw that broke the camel's back, and my vision darkens. Shit, I think I'm going to pass out. The last thing I hear is Emmy telling her mom that I said a bad word. I came to in the middle of the road with a foil blanket on, and a soft Octonauts toy under my head. I could see lots of blue lights, 3 police cars, and an ambulance. That one was for me. I can also see my neighbors out of the corner of my eye. My hearing returns, and the little girl tells me her little brother volunteered his toy because I hit my head when I fell. Suddenly, I'm up and looking around to count all 5 of the family members and checking for injury. Over the top of their heads, I can see an arm frantically waving in and out of view. Yeah, you guessed it. Moving weirdos broke into my neighbor's house. I see the woman is standing still, her head still slumped to the side just as she's lowered into a police car. I was later told that as I spoke to my neighbors out their bedroom window, their dad had gone to fight the intruders and kicked the woman down the stairs as she was climbing them. The man of the duo was the frantically moving shadow I had seen from the doorway. Police reckon they'd been trying doors up and down our street and finally found one that was unlocked. I then told them about the couple trying our door earlier in the afternoon. At that point, I'm guided to the ambulance and sat on the bed whilst paramedics tend to a large cut on the back of my head from my fall. I vaguely feel them removing gravel, cleaning, gluing and dressing it. But I'm more than preoccupied watching 2 police try to contain the human dancing inflatable man. They can't catch both arms at the same time to cuff him, so eventually, one policeman is cuffed to one of the man's hands, and thus has his arm flung every which way as the man continues to move. I have no idea what they've been tried with, if they were on drugs, or had a movement disorder. Me and my dad also have a small bet on this matter. I also don't know when the court hearing is yet, but as a key witness, I'll be told when they need me in court. But I would happily go the rest of my life without hearing a child scream at 2 a.m., as well as seeing those weird moving creeps. I'm afraid that my story might not sound as dramatic as others you've heard, but I remember every detail like it happened yesterday, and that's saying something. I was around 11 or 12 years old at the time, just a kid enjoying a summer day at Great America with my older sister. She was about 16 at that point, just old enough to boss me around and more or less get away with it. We had already been on a bunch of rides that day, but there was one I didn't want to try. It was this massive pirate ship that swung like a pendulum, eventually doing full 360-degree loops where riders would hang upside down. My sister kept pestering me to go on it. I kept saying no, but she just kept nudging. Eventually, I gave in, mostly just to stop the nagging. While we were standing in line, we happened to notice this older guy a few people ahead of us. For the sake of the story, we'll call him Carl, which is not his real name. He was being loud, yelling about his favorite sports teams to no one in particular. At first, we just thought he was joking around with a group of girls nearby. But looking back, they didn't seem like they were with him, and they too mostly tried to ignore him. We got on the ride, and sure enough, my sister screamed like crazy the entire time. That was her thing. She said that it made rides more fun for her. I just felt like my stomach was doing backflips, and by the time the ride ended, I was feeling pretty nauseous. As we got off, I noticed the group of girls walking away briskly from Carl, calling him a weirdo. He just stood there grinning, almost as if it didn't bother him at all. Now, we were on this little bridge that overlooked part of the park, and I told my sister that I needed a second. I leaned against the railing, trying my best to get some fresh air. My head was spinning, and I was solely focused on breathing and not puking. When, out of nowhere, I felt 2 big arms wrap around my waist and lift me straight into the air. My stomach dropped for a whole new reason. For a second, I honestly thought I was about to get thrown over the edge of the bridge. My body locked up, and I couldn't even scream. Just like that, though, I was back on the ground. I spun around to see Carl standing there, smiling like he hadn't just scared the life out of me. My sister rushed over and immediately started questioning this man. "Why did you just pick him up like that?" she asked, putting herself between Carl and myself. He looked like he was going to be sick, he said, shrugging. Thought maybe he wanted some air. Okay, how is lifting someone into the air going to help with that? But he ignored her and turned back to me. You doing all right now, buddy? I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared past him, clearly too shaken to respond. Come on, he said. Look at someone when they're talking to you. You bored or something? I bet you are. Going on rides with your... What is she? Your friend? Your sister? He looked at my sister as if trying to size her up. Doesn't matter what she is. I heard her screaming on that ride. Bet she's not up for anything else scary. Probably ready to call it a day, but not you, right? You've got more in you. My sister cut in. Leave him alone. What we're doing is none of your business. But Carl just kept on. No, it is. Everyone who comes to Great America should have a good time. Tell you what, kid. Why don't you ditch her and come to the water park with me? She doesn't look like the type to have fun getting wet anyway. But you and me, we'll hit all the water rides. After that, I'll take you out for lunch. Whatever you want, it's my treat. I froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. My stomach, which was already queasy, twisted in a whole different way. An adult stranger inviting a kid to ditch his sibling and go out to eat? I wasn't naive. I knew this was bad. Potentially really bad. I took a small step to the side, trying to move past him. But Carl shifted slightly. Just enough to block my path. We were still on the bridge and I had nowhere to go. My brain was racing and I knew that we needed a way out. So I faked a phone call. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and held it to my ear. Hey Mom, yeah, we just got off the pirate ship ride. Oh, you're by the food court? Okay, me and Sis are on our way now. I made sure Carl heard every word. With that, I gently pushed past him. My sister followed my lead without even saying a word. We didn't run, not yet at least. We kept a steady pace until we turned a corner and were out of Carl's line of sight. Then we sprinted. We ran all the way to the park entrance, only stopping when we reached the front gate. We tried to tell the park staff what had happened, but they just seemed to brush it off. Since this man hadn't technically done anything illegal, they told us that their hands were tied. We didn't even get this man's real name, so aside from a general description, we couldn't give them much. To this day, I think about how that situation could have gone another direction. If I hadn't had the presence of mind to fake that call, or if my sister hadn't been there. Maybe if Carl had just been a little more forceful. It's actually a terrifying thought. Carl didn't take me, but he definitely tried to. So, to the creepy guy who literally picked me up off the ground at an amusement park, let's not meet. Not now, not ever. This takes place about 10 years ago in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm originally from California, so trading out my city life for a less urban lifestyle was pretty challenging for me. Making friends was hard, but I made the move to be with my dad, who lived in an apartment complex with a roommate. My dad was a trucker, so he was gone for weeks at a time, while I was left alone to work and come home to a foreign place that I was slowly becoming accustomed to. The roommate was gone most of the time because he had a girlfriend, and he would leave his dog with me, so I never really truly felt alone in the apartment. I also had an old lady for a neighbor that would come up to check on me too. That's how people were in that area, and I found it kind of endearing how people knew their neighbors. I got to know everyone in my building's name after about 6 months of living there, except for one. There was this guy, I'd say in his early to mid-50s, who lived directly below my apartment. He looked, for lack of a better description, like a creep. He was bald, except for on the sides of his head, which that hair was straggly. He was tall and kind of skinny, had these outdated 90s glasses that you'd see on America's Most Wanted, as well as a thick mustache. He was the only person in the building who wasn't particularly friendly, or at least didn't make the effort to say hello or introduce himself to me. He also happened to be the maintenance man for all 5 buildings in the complex. That part didn't give me much pause at first. I honestly don't care if you're not overtly friendly to me. I enjoy having space of my own, and sometimes being too friendly can come off suspicious. That's just a personal problem for me, but I'm explaining why it didn't send up any red flags at first. One day, when I was pulling out of the driveway to go to work in the morning, I noticed across the large lawn that led to the door to our buildings, the maintenance man was standing in the center, staring directly at me. Stare may actually be the wrong word here, more like glare. At first, I looked around confused, thinking perhaps he was looking at someone or something behind me, but I was the only one there. Although a bit sketched, I shrugged it off and continued about my day, forgetting all about it by the time I clocked out. The next day, I was over at my neighbor Claire's apartment, the older lady that I had mentioned, and she happened to bring up a maintenance issue she had, but mentioned she would never ask the maintenance man for anything, and neither should I. I tried to ask her more about what she meant by that, but she ended up being very broad and said something along the lines of, "Oh, he's just a known creep around here." Well, fast forward to the first incident. It was around 2 a.m. one night, and I was still awake, but only just barely, sitting on the couch watching Parks and Rec alone in the apartment. I was starting to drift off into sleep when I heard a soft noise near the front door. Thankfully, the show was pretty low in volume because normally I don't pick up on quiet noises most of the time. I turned off the TV and began to focus on listening. Next to the living room, on the right side is the patio area, and on the left is the kitchen and the front door. The light from the moon and outside lamps were flooding through the patio glass door, so I could see the doorknob to the front door moving. Not just moving, but clearly someone was using a key. In an instant, the door flung open and I was on my feet, with nowhere to hide at that point. I stood my ground and saw the silhouette step into the kitchen. That's when I saw that it was the maintenance man. My stomach dropped, and he stopped dead in his tracks when he spotted me, looking as if it was unexpected to find me awake. I noticed he had a large coat on, even though it wasn't winter or even particularly cold that night. I noticed that detail only because the jacket looked bulky, as if he were carrying things in it that I couldn't see. "What the fuck are you doing?" was all I managed to squeak out. I was shaking, my knees feeling like they were going to give out. For reference, I'm a 22-year-old woman standing a whopping 5'4", with no way to defend myself at all from where I was standing. He looked shocked, which made me feel like I had gained a little power from the situation. He retorted confusedly and angrily even with, "Your toilet is making a loud noise that I could hear from my bedroom." I found myself both angry and terrified, and only reacted with more anger when I saw him scrambling for excuses. "So you just let yourself into my apartment at 2 a.m? I'm reporting this to management first thing." He stepped closer to me then. I backed up a few steps, but still did my best to hold my ground, quickly turning on the light closest to me so he could see the fury in my face. "The toilet is rumbling. I need to check it. Now." Now I was trembling so hard that I could barely stand. I had adrenaline and anger and fear all coursing heavily through my body. "Get the f*** out." He started to take the liberty to look around the kitchen where he was standing. My head immediately thought, "Shit, what if he goes for a knife?" And that's when he said it. "I can come in whenever I want." The sentence makes me shiver to this day. I didn't know what to do, and felt the power over the situation quickly dwindling down to a bad feeling that something awful was going to happen. "Bro, if you don't get the fuck out of my apartment right now, I'm going to start screaming as loud as I can." I knew my voice was cracking and shaky, which made my heart drop into my stomach. I immediately felt like I was going to be sick when he took yet another step forward towards me. "Check the lease. I can come in whenever I want. I'll see you later." He winked at me, creating this wave of nausea, and I even felt faint. He slowly turned around and walked out, closing the door behind him and even going so far as to lock it from the outside with his extra key. The next day, as promised, I contacted management as soon as the office opened. But straight away, I could tell the conversation wasn't going anywhere when the manager sounded irritated right off the bat. When I told her that the guy entered my apartment illegally, she cut me off and told me that they don't allow any illegal activity, and took what I was saying very seriously. I thought, yeah, I've got him. Until the manager said, "You can't just throw around accusations without proof. This man has dedicated over 20 years to working for this company, and we don't plan on getting rid of him anytime soon. Perhaps if you had read over your lease like you should have." Yeah, this woman was actually scolding me here. Then you would have seen the clause that states that a maintenance worker has keys to the entire property. And if there's a maintenance issue, they are permitted to access the property at any time of day. This absolutely floored me. And she had me. I didn't read the lease carefully. When I moved there, my dad was already living in the apartment, and I literally had nowhere else to go. So if I were to be living there, I was going to have to sign the lease no matter what. And that's what I did. Needless to say, nothing got done that day. Fast forward again. A few days go by, and I don't see Mr. Maintenance Freak. Until I do. This time, I'm pulling in after a long 10-hour shift at work. I haven't forgotten about the scary incident, but I had put it in the back of my mind for the time being to concentrate on other things, although I did lose sleep over it. I park my car facing the large lawn area again and start using my phone for a few minutes. I'm peering down at it and glance up for a split second before I see him there. He's standing across the lawn staring angrily at me again. This time, I mean furious. I quickly look back down and pretend to not have seen him, getting that sinking feeling yet again. As a paranoid person, I put the key in the ignition just in case and pretended to keep scrolling on my phone while subtly locking my door. I glance up again, and this time, he's striding right towards me, very fast. I look in my rearview mirror, hoping to see someone else that he may be stomping angrily towards. And of course, there's no one behind me. It's nearly dark out now, but when he gets to about 10, maybe 15 feet away from my car, I can hear him shouting something, although I can't make out what he's saying. Now I put my phone down, and I'm watching him come right at me until he reaches my window and starts banging on it with all of his might. Then he slams his body into the door. He's also fidgeting angrily with the handle, even though my doors are locked. My car doesn't have automatic locks, so I'm praying to God that all my doors are locked at this point. My hands are shaking so bad that I'm having trouble starting the car. And when I finally do, that's when I realize what he's saying, which was a repeated cycle of the following phrases. "I'm gonna get you, bitch. I told you I can come in whenever I want. You really want to take me on? I'll fucking kill you." I peeled out of there so fast, not even knowing where to go. I drove to the next county over, found a motel, and stayed there the night. The next day I took off work and went straight to the management's office. I told them exactly what had happened, and no matter what I said, they didn't believe me. This maintenance man was apparently God's gift to mankind or something. He was a monument to the company, and they appreciated his 20 years of service and dedication to them, over him threatening someone's life with his words. Long story short, I lost it. I called the management lady a psychotic and ended up getting evicted. I reported all of this to the police, but between the lack of evidence that I had and his perfect, shining record and references from his employers, the police said there was nothing they could do to move forward. My dad and I ended up finding a nice house about 10 minutes away from that place. I ended up inviting Claire, my older neighbor, to the new house a few months later. That's when she told me that there was a single woman in the apartment before the roommate and my dad had moved in there, and that she also left in a hurry after something happened with the maintenance man. This involved taking photos of her walking to and from her apartment and to her car. When she confronted him about it, he told her, "I can do whatever I want." I guess in Kansas City, maintenance workers are like God. They get away with whatever they want and have shining reputations. I think when it was all said and done, I lasted about 2 years in Missouri. I've been back in California ever since. The resounding lesson that I took from this story was, always be sure to read through your entire lease and rental agreement before you put pen to paper. There's no telling the headache that it could save you down the road. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and when I hit 6th grade, I started attending Dorothy Fisher Magnet Middle School. It was there that I met a boy named Patrick. From the moment we met, we clicked. He was sharp, quick-witted, and overall just a very cool kid. He wasn't just a classmate of mine. He became my best friend. For a couple of years, we were absolutely inseparable. But then my family moved out of Detroit, and I started going to a different school. Just like that, Patrick and I pretty much lost touch. There was no falling out, no drama, we just kind of drifted apart, now that we didn't see each other in class every day. Once that happened, occasionally I would find myself thinking about what happened to him. Sometimes I'd even think about looking him up, but life gets busy, and those thoughts also faded with time. That is, until February of 2006. I remember hearing about a gruesome double homicide just a few miles from where I lived. It was a young married couple, Melissa and Scott Barrels. They had been found dead in their home, and worst of all, Melissa had been 10 weeks pregnant. At first, all it was a terrible story, obviously, but in no way personal to me. But then I heard the names of the suspects, and one of them stopped me cold. Patrick. The same Patrick I rode the bus with. The same Patrick that I laughed with at lunch. The same Patrick that I'd known when we were just kids. As it turned out, Patrick had crossed paths with Melissa at a grocery store where she worked. He struck up a friendly rapport with her, but it wasn't just casual conversation. Patrick, over time, had developed a fixation on this woman. Once Melissa made it clear that she only saw him as a friend, Patrick refused to accept reality, and one day, he ended up following her home. Somehow, he convinced her to let him and his girlfriend, Samantha, come inside and hang out for a bit. It seemed innocent enough at first, but apparently Patrick had brought a gun with him. What happened next was no less than horrifying. Patrick struck Melissa in the head with the weapon, knocking her to the ground. Then he wrapped a belt around her neck and began to choke the life out of her. When that didn't work quickly enough to extinguish her life, he told Samantha to help, and that's what she did. While they were in the midst of trying to kill Melissa, her husband Scott came home. Patrick then hit him over the head and locked him in the bathroom while they finished what they had started with Melissa. All of that happened, and then they turned their attention to Scott. At this point, Samantha left the house and went to a CVS pharmacy nearby. She came back with duct tape, syringes, and bleach. They attempted to inject the bleach into Scott's veins as some horrible attempt at taking his life. When that didn't work, they resorted to pure torture. For roughly 4 excruciating hours, Scott endured a hell that I can't even imagine. Eventually, his body just gave out, and Scott was no more. When both Melissa and Scott were dead, Patrick and Samantha wrapped the bodies in painter's plastic and sealed them in with duct tape. They moved them into a back room of the house, a room that Melissa and Scott had been preparing as a nursery. Then they simply threw a tarp over the corpses and fled the house, but not before taking plenty of the couple's personal documents with them. It eventually came out that they had planned to assume their identities and start over somewhere new. It didn't take long for someone to notice something was wrong, though. Melissa's parents grew concerned when she didn't show up for work. They called the police and requested a welfare check. That's when officers located the bodies, hidden beneath the tarp in what would have soon been a baby's room. Patrick and Samantha were already on the run. Their route led them north to Flint, Michigan. There, they met a man at a gay club. Someone kind, someone trusting. And this person offered them a place to stay. For 3 days, they stayed in this man's house. But the man then saw the news. Recognizing both Patrick and Samantha from the TV, he tried his best to convince them to turn themselves in. When Patrick refused, the man said that he'd call the police himself. Knowing that he was one phone call away from being captured, Patrick snapped. He shot that man in the back, then walked over and shot him again once in the head. Utilizing what was quickly becoming a pattern, they wrapped his body the same way they had wrapped the barrels, and then stashed it in the bed of his own pickup truck underneath a tarp. The next day, a former friend of Samantha's reached out to her, asking for a ride to a job interview. Strangely, Samantha agreed. On the surface, everything seemed calm, but the friend had just seen their faces on the news and seemingly knew exactly who she was dealing with. Still, though, she let them pick her up. I'm not sure if she had a change of heart or what while she was in the car with them, but as they drove her to the hotel where her interview was scheduled, she asked the couple to wait for her in the parking lot. As soon as she stepped inside the lobby, she phoned the police. By the time law enforcement arrived, Patrick and Samantha were still sitting there, still waiting for their friend to come out. They were arrested on the spot. When police searched the truck they were in, they found the third body of the killing spree underneath the tarp. Both Patrick and Samantha were charged with multiple counts of murder. They're now serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. The ID channel eventually covered their case in an episode of Wicked Attraction, titled Single White Male, which first aired in 2009. If you're curious, the full names of the assailants are Patrick Selepak and Samantha Bashinsky. You can look them up. There's no shortage of news articles, court records, and documentaries that lay out every gruesome detail. But for me, I don't need to revisit any of it. I already lived through the most unsettling part, because I knew Patrick before all of this. I sat next to him in class. We swapped snacks at lunch. We talked about our futures like we had any idea what was coming. He was truly my best friend. You never think the kid laughing next to you in class could someday grow up to take lives, violently and senselessly. But sometimes you're wrong, and realizing just how wrong you were, that's what can haunt you the most. Because it makes you question everything. Who we really are, what we're capable of, and how well we ever truly know the people that we once called our friends. We all make dumb decisions in life, but in this case, I was just plain out stupid. I arranged to meet a guy off of Tinder, but because of my heightened anxiety about driving, I also arranged for him to pick me up outside my place. I had been talking to him for a few weeks at least, but looking back, it seems like I was far too trusting way too early. The choice I made on this day could have ended me, but thankfully, I'm still around to tell the tale. The guy picked me up in his car and told me he planned to take us out for sushi. I love sushi, so I thought, great. He entered the name of the restaurant into his GPS, and we were off, making pleasant conversation on the way there until I started seeing woods when I looked out my window. I was pretty confused. We were supposed to be going into town, not into the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. Fear set in pretty hard then. He said, "I swear, the GPS is taking me through here. I didn't choose the route." "Okay, man, just get us back to civilization." My eyes were wide, and I must have looked like a deer in headlights. His face was really apprehensive, so he must have known that I was scared, nearly completely shitless. Oh my God, I thought to myself. I should have just conquered my anxiety about driving and met him somewhere public. Or better yet, not met with this guy at all. Seriously, what the fuck was I thinking? I'm going to get murdered here in these woods. I just know it. I tried checking my phone to see if I could assist him with the GPS. and that's when he uttered those spine-chilling words. "There's no signal out here." I remember just thinking to myself to try to look calm. Don't let him think you suspect he's onto something. But man, was I terrified. The tips of my fingers were cold while I was simultaneously sweating. If he was going to kill me, part of me wanted him to just get it over with, so I wouldn't be left in anticipation. His forehead was now perspiring. He kept saying, "I swear, I'm not doing this. I'm trying to get us back on route to the sushi place." I said, "Bro, I don't even care about the sushi anymore. Just get us to a gas station. Anywhere with people at this point." He said, "There's no need for you to worry. I don't even have my shovel in the trunk, or anything if that's what you're thinking." Which did very little to calm my nerves. We finally did reach the restaurant, after what felt like an eternity. I don't think I'd ever been so scared in my life. I honestly didn't have much of an appetite, and I was physically trembling when we arrived. But I figured he didn't kill me when he had the chance, so I guess it was safe now to continue with our date. I already planned on taking an Uber home because I didn't want to go through that experience again. But I was shocked out of my mind when he then asked me, "So, when do you think we'll have sex?" I nearly choked on a piece of sashimi. What? I didn't know where this was coming from, and I didn't know how he could ask me something like this now on a first date, when he literally saw me pale as a ghost just a few moments ago. You know, like, how long are you gonna make me wait for sex? A day? A week? A month? I stared at him, absolutely dumbfounded. I couldn't respond because I was speechless in that moment. "Well, I can't wait a whole month. I'm just telling you now," he said. I didn't say anything, and the rest of the date was insanely awkward. I said goodbye as I took my Uber home, and only seconds after my driver pulled out of the restaurant parking lot, this guy texted me to say he doesn't think it'll work out with me because he needs a girl with a higher libido. I didn't argue. I just texted back a simple, "Okay," ready to be done with this man. When the Uber driver drove me home, he didn't take me through the wilderness pathway of a potential murder site. He took me home through streets, other cars, lights, the sweetest scene to my immense relief. I couldn't help but wonder why my date had to take me through an hour drive through the wilderness to get to a restaurant that was less than 15 minutes away. The whole thing was just chilling. I don't know if he had anything sinister planned, or if this was just an honest mistake. I'm just glad that I made it out alive. I learned a tough lesson that night, one that I should have already known, but that I foolishly ignored for some reason. When you're lining up a first date with someone you met on an app, don't let a stranger do the driving. I've had a lot of bad luck in my life when it comes to violent encounters with the wrong sort of people, though unfortunately, this wasn't the first incident, and far from the last. Graduating from a relatively prestigious high school with an emphasis in engineering, I decided without much thought to pursue a degree in engineering while in college. In the end, I gained admission to Virginia Tech and headed off to Southwest Virginia in August of 2006. Long story short, it was a big and somewhat difficult adjustment, and it wasn't going quite as well as I would have liked. As an interesting aside, on the very first day of classes, in fact, in my very first college class ever, one of the school staff stuck their heads in the door and told us that classes were canceled for the day and that we should head back to our dorms and stay there because there may have been a shooter on campus. Wait, what? It turns out that there had been an inmate at the local hospital in town, and he had killed a security guard in order to escape, and the authorities believed he might head to campus to blend in with the thousands of students. I remember he was caught, but I don't think he was on campus. I honestly don't really remember that part, but it was kind of a weird way to start college, to say the least. No huge deal though, right? Well, more like a very small dress rehearsal for what was yet to come. Anyway, fast forward 8 months later, mid-April. I woke up Monday in my dorm room in Cochrane Hall at about 7:30 if memory serves. Looking out my window to the northeast, I could see across the courtyard to West Ambler Johnston, and down into the courtyard below was an ambulance. Now, you have to understand, Virginia Tech is a huge school. When I went there in 06, 07, there was something like 26,000 students in attendance. Because the school is located in a rural area, they provided basic medical services and EMS on campus. With this many kids running around, getting drunk, forgetting to take meds, taking too many meds, it wasn't super uncommon to see an ambulance on campus, so I didn't think much of it. I did check my campus email to make sure everything was okay though, and in the absence of any warnings about anything, I pulled some clothes and shoes on and shuffled over to D2, which is a huge buffet-style dining hall. I love their apple fritters, and at $170 a breakfast, you weren't going to beat it. Perfect for a quick meal before my French class at 9 a.m. Having accomplished this, I proceeded across campus to Holden Hall, which is basically the east wing of a bigger building. The west wing of the building is called Norris Hall. French class started, and I think we were talking about Sarkozy and the upcoming French elections, when we started hearing the weird sounds of the PA system outside. The week before, it included some minor disruptions to our schedule in the form of prank bomb scares, and we figured some idiot was at it again. No big deal if that's the case, but boy, were we wrong. About 5 minutes later, we see some cop cars pull up outside, and about a minute after that, we see more cop cars pull up along with a big van, and out of the van come several men dressed in full black body armor with what look like M16s. Okay, maybe not a prank bomb scare anymore. At this point, our instructor was having some trouble keeping us focused on our lesson and sort of allowed us to watch what was going on. Someone said we should turn on the TV and see if there was any information on the news. The information wasn't totally clear from what we saw on TV, but it seemed that someone had shot 8 people on campus. And I remember us talking and saying that there was no way that it was that many people. At this moment, I decided I should call my mom. I whipped out my phone, not caring that we were still in class, and dialed her up at work. Thankfully, she answered. "Hey Mom, are you watching the news right now?" "No, I'm at work." "I know. You should probably turn it on. But I wanted to let you know I'm okay before the phone stopped working. I'm old enough that I recalled from after 9/11 that everyone and their mom was trying to call loved ones that day. So the cell grid was basically overloaded and most calls wouldn't go through. I just assumed the same was about to happen here, even if nothing had actually happened. For all it's worth, the grid did go down later." I said goodbye to my mom, and I also called my friend Allie to make sure she was okay, especially since she lived in the same building that I'd seen the ambulance at earlier. She was fine, and I went back to watching the news. It came to light at this point that there had apparently been more than one shooting incident at the school, at Allie's building, and now at Norris Hall, which we'd already figured out on our own. Looking out the window at the ever-growing sea of cop cars below us, the one sitting on Drillfield Drive and on the field itself, we suddenly hear outside the windows from the other end of the building. We all looked at each other, and suddenly this was now way more serious. It was real. People were being shot inside of our building. Instantly and collectively, we decided that maybe we should be a little more proactive about our safety. We turned the lights off, turned the TV off, and start rearranging the furniture in the room to block the door, though admittedly the makeshift barricade probably wouldn't have stopped a really determined person from getting inside, since the door itself had frosted glass on its upper half instead of being solid. We figure that this is better than doing nothing though, and then we sit down on the floor near the front of the room, talking to each other in hushed tones. After about 15 minutes, we hear footsteps outside the room. Everyone freezes and no one makes a sound. I remember looking up from the floor towards the door, wondering if this was it. Is this going to be the way I die? A few seconds later, we hear a tap on the door and a deep voice. "This is Deputy so-and-so of thus and such Sheriff's Department. Stay where you are, leave your lights off, and stay quiet. We'll be back for you as soon as we can." This was not a member of either the campus police or the Blacksburg police, but from looking out the window, we already knew that there were cops there from everywhere within driving distance. We all look around at each other in solemn silence. We'd all just been thinking the same thing before the deputy had spoken. Thankfully, he hadn't asked us to open the door because I don't think anyone would have gotten up from where they were sitting. We stayed down and quiet for a couple more hours. Can't really remember what it was we talked about while I was there since we were all so keyed up. At this juncture, it's been a long time waiting, and then we finally hear footsteps again outside the door. This time, we saw evidence of who the man was before he spoke. A gold badge pressed up against the frosted glass, and this assured us that what we heard was legitimate. "This is Deputy so-and-so again. It's time to go." We all quietly got up, grabbed our bags. A couple of guys in the class, myself included, started pulling the tables away from the door as quickly and as quietly as we could. Then we creaked the door open. I think on some level, all of us expected that this was just a trick. But when we did open the door, standing a few feet away was a sheriff's deputy in full uniform, with his sidearm drawn, held at his side. He held his finger up to his lips, indicating we should stay quiet. And then he dropped his voice to a whisper. "You're going to walk downstairs as quietly as you can. There are 2 more cops by the door outside. They know you're coming. Just walk straight outside and don't stop." He nodded at us, and we started making our way downstairs. He got on his radio and signaled, "Students coming out." When we got to the midway landing, we could see the front door cracked and a cop peering in. Walking up to the door, he opened it wider to let us pass, and as he did, he looked straight at us and said quietly but very seriously after signaling on his radio, "Run." Walking out that door into the morning light, I was greeted by a sight that I will never forget. I've never seen so many cop cars in one place in my entire life. And honestly, I hope I never have cause to again. There were easily 200 or 300 Crown Vics, and a smattering of additional vans, trucks, and command center vehicles crowding every inch of space, starting about 100 feet from that door. In front of those vehicles stood a group of at least 40 officers armed with M16s, and even a couple of MP5s directly in our path. As soon as we were outside, the several cops to the left and right of this formation waved at us in an unmistakable gesture of "move your ass." We ran off to the left of the cops with the big guns, over Drillfield Drive, and onto the drill field itself, and didn't stop until we were almost to the other side. I read the news online after I got back to my dorm. MSNBC had something at the bottom of an article that said something like, "If you have any information about this, please contact us at generic corporate email address." Thinking little of it, I emailed them with my contact info, and within 10 minutes, my phone absolutely blew up. I was beset with interview requests and questions from at least 20 different people, and actually arranged to meet their news crew down at the on-campus hotel that evening. I ended up doing 2 national interviews, one on Scarborough Country and another with Geraldo Rivera, who was kind of self-absorbed but was cool enough to order us pizza and sit with us while we ate before the interview. I did another with my 2 friends who had agreed to accompany me down to the circus that the hotel had become. I even did a few more for some local radio stations and some print news before deciding that I'd had quite enough for the day, and I went back to my dorm to get some sleep. I hadn't really been sold on the whole college experience up until that point, but strangely enough, if anything, the whole experience seemed to bring me and my friends closer together for the last month at school. Luckily for me, no one I knew was hurt beyond a friend of a friend breaking his leg badly after jumping out of a window of Professor Librescu's classroom. If you have time, I really think you should check this guy out. an engineering professor who had survived the Holocaust, and as his final act, held the door of his classroom shut to give his students time to escape. He died at the scene, but was the definition of a hero. The rest of the tragedy is a part of the public record now. I'm sad to say that I left Virginia Tech after that year for completely unrelated reasons, and I always missed it. But I still talk to my friends from that first year, and I miss both the place and their company. Virginia Tech seems to have had a horrible patch of bad luck starting in 2006 and lasting for a few years, also including a really gruesome beheading in a dining hall, an accidental death and a suicide, a close call with carbon monoxide poisoning for the entire cheerleading team at the hotel, all in the year following the big shooting. They also had a couple who were attending the school abducted and murdered a few years ago, but if I remember correctly, it happened farther north in the state, I think near Charlottesville. Once again, luckily, I never experienced any of that. I think I'd fulfilled my quota of random bad luck, at least for a while. The person that brought death and destruction with him back in 2006 was a fellow student named Cho Sung-Hui, a senior majoring in English. He was known to be a loner, withdrawn and troubled, with a long history of mental health issues. Cho had been legally declared mentally ill back in 2005 in order to undergo outpatient treatment. Despite all of that, he passed background checks to purchase the 2 semi-automatic pistols that he would later use in the attack. That day, he shot and killed 32 people while injuring 17 others, before ultimately turning the gun on himself inside of Norris Hall. I'm not sure if it currently stands as such, but at the time, it was the deadliest school shooting in US history. Cho even left behind a chilling manifesto filled with grievances and delusions of persecution. He saw himself as avenging the downtrodden and claimed he was forced into violence by a world that mocked him. What we all lived through that day wasn't just a tragedy. It was the culmination of ignored warning signs, loopholes in a broken system, and a failure to protect both him and everyone around him. Cho Sung-Hui, I'm thankful we never met. I'm even more grateful that we never will. For context, my boyfriend and I are currently homeless and living out of our car. There's this quiet road near a beach by the bay that we often park on. It runs alongside some old train tracks and ends near a few industrial plants, none of which are open at night. There's only one road in and out, so people don't just happen upon it. Most nights, it's usually just other folks sleeping in their cars like us, or people heading to AA meetings at a nearby community center, or the bars a few blocks away. But this particular night, the whole area felt rather deserted. We'd parked a little farther up the road than we typically do, hoping to snag a better Wi-Fi connection. It was around 12:30 a.m. We were in the front seats reclined, watching YouTube with our dog and slowly dozing off. That's when we heard a vehicle roll up behind us. No headlights, just the low rumble of tires on asphalt. Now, our windows are completely covered for privacy. Reflective covers, blankets. But we can peek out if we needed to. My boyfriend peeked and said that it was a van. This didn't set off alarm bells. We just figured someone else was looking for a place to sleep. Well, a few minutes later, we heard what sounded like 3, maybe 4 people talking on the opposite side of the street. Then we heard the van drive off. Okay, cool. Peace and quiet yet again. But then came a knock on the driver's side window. That's my window. We paused the video and my boyfriend muted the laptop. I called out, "Yeah?" Silence. This time my boyfriend tried. Louder this time. "Can we help you?" Nothing. That's when I happened to realize my door was still unlocked. I quickly hit the lock button, and after about 30 seconds of silence, I cautiously pulled back the window cover. No one out there. We figured maybe it was just someone mistaking our car for someone else's and did our best to try to settle back in. But then, through the slight crack in our windshield cover, illuminated by the street lamp outside, we caught the silhouette of someone moving slowly around the front of our car. That's when a soft tapping followed, this time on the passenger side. My boyfriend pulled down the cover immediately, but again, there was no one to be seen. Then, almost instantaneously, there was a knock on my side. That's when it clicked. There couldn't be just one person out there. There wasn't enough time for someone to circle around between the knocks. And earlier, we had heard multiple voices. That's when I started to get nervous. Maybe not everyone got back in the van before it drove off. Still, trying my best to stay calm, I slowly peeled back my side window cover. That's when we saw him. White guy, mid-30s, maybe early 40s, thin. He was holding a flashlight and something else under his sweater. That one was cradled awkwardly in his other hand, so I couldn't exactly see what it was. Our windows were fogged over from our own breath, so visibility was poor. But it gave us the creeps immediately. That's when he leaned down and said, "Hey, I need a jump." I found it interesting that that's what he went with. Almost instinctively, we told him, "Sorry, we're just about to leave and we're kind of in a rush." That's when he whined, "Come on, I've been down here for hours looking for help." But that's where things got weirder. We had parked at this spot about 45 minutes earlier. We had gotten out, let the dog do his business, while we set up for the night. If this man had been down here the whole time, then why didn't he ask us for help then? Additionally, we hadn't heard a single sound that would indicate a car struggling to start. No engine attempting to turn over, no clicking, not even keys jingling. There was nothing. Red flags started going off in my head when I put together that he said, "I've been down here." Singular. Yet earlier we heard multiple voices, and now he was the only one visible? Whoever else was with him was definitely trying to stay out of sight. After a few more seconds of tense silence, he turned and huffed back across the street to a white car with black rims. This was a car we had seen before, but had never associated it with him. I suddenly got this terrible gut feeling. That car probably wasn't his. I started the engine without saying much and told my boyfriend to start wiping down the window so I could see. As soon as I could, I drove off. Something about this entire situation just reeked of danger. It felt like whoever this was, they were trying to lure us into opening a door or rolling down a window. And when that didn't work, the guy gave some sob story, hoping that we'd step out and offer to help. But then what? Maybe they'd try to rob us. Maybe they'd go for the laptop, the one casting a faint glow through the blankets. Or maybe they were going to try to jack the car once we stepped out. There's always the possibility that it was something worse than that. Of course, maybe he really did just need a jump. That's a thought I've entertained between then and me writing this. Maybe I left some poor guy stranded on the side of the road, and I'm the jerk of the story. But I don't exactly buy that. We drove to a McDonald's that night, grabbed something to eat, and then parked behind a friend's place, somewhere much less exposed. Our trunk lock had recently broken, and it was now held shut by only bungee cords. Almost everything we owned was in there, and it's been a growing worry. It makes me feel like there's a target on us for any and all thieves. Well, the next morning, we drove back by the beach road. That same white car with the black rims was still parked there. Only now, one of the back windows was smashed in. That man? Nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't think that was ever his car. I think he and others arrived in that van. One of them left with it, while the rest stayed behind to case vehicles, or worse, to wait for someone like us to make a mistake. My boyfriend's been a bit shaken ever since. We're now actively looking to rent a space in someone's driveway, someplace much safer in comparison, where we're not so exposed, somewhere we won't be sitting ducks for strangers in the night. He jokingly teased the dog for not barking, but honestly, I think our pup was smarter than us in that moment. If we'd needed to stay silent and act like the car was empty, having a quiet dog might have helped. It's like he was trying to read the room and waiting for our signal before he went off. I'm just so grateful that I wasn't out there alone. Even together, I think we were outnumbered. If it had just been me, a 100-pound woman alone in a car in the dark, I doubt they'd have been so subtle. Sometimes I wonder if I've just watched too many true crime shows, if I'm paranoid from years of scary stories. But then again, my grandfather worked as a detective for 30 years, specializing in sex crimes and homicide in this exact area that we're from. He always told me, the real monsters out there aren't boogeymen. They're just regular men. And that's something that I've never forgotten. I'm going to start this by saying that this was the one time my parents let me stay home alone without a much older babysitter. Just the one time. That's all they gave me. And of course, it turned into the kind of memory that burns itself into your brain. It was a hot, sticky summer afternoon in our sleepy little suburb. I was 10 years old, finally given a sliver of independence. My parents had left me in the care of the two girls across the street while they were at work. Tammy, the older sister, was 13 and full of bossy confidence. Her little sister Sarah was 9, and at the time, she was my best friend in the entire world. We spent the first few hours lounging on their trampoline, playing that endless loop of, what do you want to do? I don't know, what do you want to do? The kind of aimless boredom that pretty much defines a summer day. Then, like a bell signaling salvation, we heard it. The unmistakable jingle of the ice cream truck drifting down the street. Instantly, we bolted. Tammy had money, so she led the charge, with Sarah and I stumbling out the front door behind her. We ran toward the corner where the truck had just parked, joining a few other neighborhood boys who had been playing baseball nearby. It should have been one of those innocent moments you look back on and smile at, but it turned into anything but that. The second I laid eyes on the driver, something in my gut twisted up. At first, I tried to brush it off. He had a long, angry-looking scar running from his cheekbone down to his jaw. His smile never faded, but it wasn't the cheerful, friendly grin you'd expect from someone serving rocket pops to kids. It was fixed, almost unnatural. And his eyes, they didn't drift across the crowd of kids like most adults. They locked right onto us. Me, Sarah, and Tammy. And they just stayed there. We got our ice cream quickly and backed away without speaking much. As we walked back towards our cul-de-sac, Tammy suddenly stopped and motioned for us to sit on Miss Day's driveway. She was the sweet old neighborhood lady who lived alone a few houses down from us. "Let's just sit here and wait for him to leave," Tammy said, glancing back towards the truck. Sarah started whining. "Come on, this is dumb, and it's hot out." But for once, I agreed with Tammy. The tension in my stomach hadn't eased a bit. It felt like we were being watched. Tammy added, "I've seen stories on the news about guys who like to snatch kids, so let's just wait." We sat there eating our ice cream, watching as the truck slowly crawled into the cul-de-sac. It made a full loop, deliberately slow. Not exactly like it was giving time for kids to run out with money, but like it was looking for something, or someone. As the truck passed us, the driver didn't just glance over. He turned his head fully, stared us down, and winked. That was enough for us. We sprinted back to Tammy and Sarah's house, slammed the front door shut, locked it, and ran up to their parents' bedroom. For a while, we sat on the edge of their bed, just catching our breath, all while laughing nervously at ourselves. Maybe we were just being silly. Maybe the guy was weird looking, sure, but maybe that was it. We flipped on some trashy daytime TV, trying to shake that weirdness off. But that's when we saw him again. From the second-story window that faced the neighborhood, we noticed that the ice cream truck was now parked outside of Miss Day's house. It had returned, but quietly this time, without the music. We didn't hear it pull up. We hadn't noticed how long it had been there. But there it sat, engine running and him still in the front seat. Eventually, the truck did drive off, but before we could even let out a sigh of relief, it was back yet again. Only this time, it was different. He parked in front of Miss Day's house yet again, but got out of the truck this time and slowly walked towards her porch. In his hand was a small notepad. It looked like he studied the outside of her home, walked around for a bit, and began writing things down. That's when Tammy gasped. He's writing down the address. We panicked, not just because he was back, but because he was being outwardly creepy now. Methodical, like this wasn't random. It's like he was planning something. He eventually returned to his truck and circled the cul-de-sac once more. When he passed us this time, he looked directly at Tammy and Sarah's house. That's where he saw us in the window, and he returned our looks right back at us. We hit the floor, flattening ourselves against the carpet, hearts pounding. Peeking from a side window, we watched him pull to a stop right in front of their house. And again, he pulled out his notepad, wrote something down, and then slowly drove off again. The moment he was out of sight, we ran out the front door, barefoot. Ice cream now long forgotten. We ran our way to Miss Day's house. She had actually just pulled into her driveway getting home from work. We knew that she worked at the local police department. Tammy spilled everything rapid fire. The drive-bys, the notepad, the way that man circled our houses. Miss Day took us seriously, and within minutes, she was on the phone with someone at the station. Here's the part that sends chills through me even now. The authorities found the guy. They found him still driving that truck. And yeah, he had a notepad, and inside were descriptions of each of us. What we looked like, what we were wearing that day. Little things that would make your stomach sink. Alongside those notes were the addresses of both Miss Day's house as well as Tammy and Sarah's house. There were even handwritten reminders. Things like 3 p.m., no one home, scrawled in the margins. Turns out this man was a registered child sex offender. Not only that though, he had an active warrant out for his arrest. And yet somehow, he was behind the wheel of an ice cream truck, working a job that gave him direct access to kids. I still don't understand how that was possible. How someone like him took up that job. How he was able to get that close to kids. To this day, whenever I hear the ice cream truck jingle on a summer afternoon, even as an adult, it doesn't make me nostalgic. It doesn't make me crave bomb pops or Choco Tacos. R.I.P. Choco Tacos, by the way. It makes me nauseous. And I think a lot about what might have happened if we hadn't run. If Tammy hadn't insisted we sit and watch. And if Miss Day hadn't come home early that day. It's those little kinds of choices that keep you safe. Or don't. After this, we never saw that man or his truck ever again. But for us, for me specifically, something else died that day. A little bit of innocence. Because as I think back, that was the last time I ever screamed for ice cream in my life. This story goes back to 2011. At the time, I lived in a rental property owned by my parents, and they allowed me to sublet the rooms. There were 4 girls living in the house, including myself. First girl was a childhood friend of mine who moved in to get away from an abusive ex. Second girl applied via an online ad, and she was normal enough except for telling everyone that her daughter was actually her niece and having a fondness for MDMA. We'll call her Party Girl. Third girl was a run-of-the-mill insurance claim processor, the quiet type, who kept to herself and usually declined any invitation from the rest of us when going out or socializing. We'll call her Quiet Girl. So Party Girl and I buy tickets to a concert out of town. Childhood friend can't get time off of work and opts to stay behind, as does Quiet Girl. No surprise there. So Party Girl and I leave on our trip and spend the night dancing away. Meanwhile, childhood friend comes home from work to find Quiet Girl sitting in the shower, screaming, crying, with the bathroom door wide open. She asks if she's okay and does what she can to calm her down. Quiet Girl says she wanted to make dinner for all of us, and Party Girl and I have ruined her cosmic plans. Childhood friend sees spoiled chicken breasts in the sink and thinks, "Aw, poor thing just wanted to do something nice," and offers to go out to dinner together as Party Girl and I will be back tomorrow night, and we could all do our roommate dinner then. While at the all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet, childhood friend notices Quiet Girl is stuffing her purse full of food. This is odd, because she's not even attempting to wrap it in napkins. She's literally just throwing chicken wings into her purse. When they get home, Quiet Girl started talking all this crazy that made no sense whatsoever, and childhood friend gets a little nervous before excusing herself to go to bed early. She then locks herself in her room and nopes out for the night. When Party Girl and I get home the next afternoon, we notice a few things. Childhood friend is already at work, but Quiet Girl is sitting on the living room couch, completely naked, and she's covered her body in the stuffed animals that belong to the rest of us. What? The rotten chicken is still in the sink and smells strongly of bleach, along with other chemicals. There are knives laying around, and the pictures that had once been adorned on the walls had now been removed. I go to my room and see all the pictures of my dad have been piled up in the middle of my bed. I ask Quiet Girl about this, and she explains that I need to be reunited with my father. My dad died in 2003, and this is troubling. Party Girl emerges from her room wondering why her underwear is piled up in the middle of her bed, along with several other possessions having gone missing. Quiet Girl says she needed them for the ritual and explains we can find what we're looking for in the backyard. That's where we find the charred remains of our things in the smoldering fire pit. Also troubling. We're both angry as hell at this point and demand that she explains her behavior. This is where she goes full crazy and explains our souls are all linked, and only through death can our bonds be truly realized. She explains that her and my cat are one soul, and he's been telling her about all of our sins and bad behavior. Also, that it's actually her cat. She then full-on threatens to end our lives as soon as the last member, childhood friend, arrives home. I grab the largest knife I own while Party Girl and I barricade ourselves in my room in the basement. She calls childhood friend, telling her not to come home as it isn't safe, and I call 911 as my life has been officially threatened by someone who has clearly lost all grip on reality. Cops arrive within minutes and ask Quiet Girl her name. At this point, she just starts screaming her first, middle, and last names repeatedly, over and over again, will not stop. At this point, my cat is trying to sneak out the front door, and I ask one of the officers to grab him. She begins to scream that it's her cat and not to touch him. I'm now in tears and offer to retrieve his adoption papers, the ones that highlight I'm his rightful owner. I'm clearly terrified and don't know what to do. Party Girl is hiding behind me. Then Quiet Girl loses her absolute shit. She jumps up and attacks the officers. It took 3 of them to pin her down and eventually arrest her. Once she was removed, I wrote up a letter of eviction and we began to bag up her room. That's when we discovered that she was a schizophrenic, one who was now off of her medication. She also had a nice little camera setup where she was apparently doing a nude side hustle online, as well as mailing out underwear to her clients. Her boyfriend came later that day to collect her things, as I had called him to notify him of the situation. he was totally clueless about it. He accused the rest of us of running a drug ring party house and driving her insane, which was not true at all. I mean, yeah, Party Girl had people over a few times, but this was always on weekends. And we were all in our early 20s, so yeah, we went out to the bar and had a good time. But it wasn't some crazy party environment. He was in complete denial of her cheating, as well as her internet activities. We changed the front and back door locks that night, and put new locks on each one of our bedroom doors as well. Quiet Girl eventually tried to serve me papers and sue me for wrongful imprisonment. But as you can imagine, nothing ever came of it. I took all of this happening as a sign. Once everyone's lease ran up, I opted not to renew any of them. I haven't had a single roommate that I wasn't related to ever since. While there have been small hiccups here and there with that plan, no one has ever stolen my things or piled up pictures of my dead dad on my bed. So I'll take that as a win. Plus, an added perk of only renting to family. I know that schizophrenia doesn't run in our genes, so that's one headache I won't ever have to deal with again.